Chapter 13 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 13. The Messenger. "Who makes all this tumult?" shouted the commissioner. "Why do I see blood and wounds and dead men? And how were you about to handle these women, one of whom by her mien is of no low degree?" And he stared at Cicely. "The tumult," answered the abbot, "was caused by yonder fool Thomas Bull, a lay brother of my monastery, who rushed among us armed and shouting, 'In the king's name, stay!'" "Then why did you not stay, Sir Abbot? Is the king's name one to be mocked at? Know that I sent on the man." "He had no warrant, Sir Commissioner, unless his bull's voice and great axe are a warrant, and I did not stay because we were doing justice upon the 3 foulest witches in the realm." "Doing justice? Whose justice, and what justice? Say, had you a warrant for your justice? If so, show it me." "These witches have been condemned by a court ecclesiastic, the judges being a bishop, a prior, and myself, and in pursuance of that judgment were about to suffer for their sins by fire," replied Malden. "A court ecclesiastic!" roared Dr. Lay. "Can courts ecclesiastic, then, toast free English folk to death? If you would not stand your trial for attempted murder, show me your warrant signed by his Grace the King, or by his justices of assize. What! You do not answer? Have you none? I thought as much. Oh ho, Clement Malden, you hang-faced Spanish dog, learn that eyes have been on you for long, and now it seems that you would usurp the king's prerogative besides." And he checked himself, then went on. "Seize that priest, and keep him fast, while I make inquiry of this business." Now some of the commissioner's guard surrounded Malden, nor did his own men venture to interfere with them, for they had enough of fighting, and were frightened by this talk about the king's warrant. Then the commissioner turned to Cicely, and said, "You are Sir John Fotterell's only child, are you not, who allege yourself to be wife to Sir Christopher Harfleet, or so says yonder prioress? Now, what was about to happen to you, and why?" "Sir," answered Cicely, "I and my waiting woman and the old sister, Bridget, were condemned to die by fire at those stakes upon a charge of sorcery, although it is true," she added, "that I knew we should not perish thus." "How did you know that, lady? By all tokens your bodies in hot flame were near enough together." And he glanced towards the stakes and the scattered faggots. "Sir, I knew it because of a vision that God sent to me in my sleep last night." "Aye, she swore that at the stake," exclaimed a voice, "and we thought her mad." "Now can you deny that she is a witch?" broke in Malden. "If she were not one of Satan's own, how could she see visions and prophesy her own deliverance?" "If visions and prophecies are proof of witchcraft, then, priest, all Holy Writ is but a seething pot of sorcery," answered Lay. "Then the Blessed Virgin and Saint Elizabeth were witches, and Paul and John should have been burnt as wizards. Continue, lady, leaving out your dreams until a more convenient time." "Sir," went on Cicely, "we have worked no sorcery, and my crime is that I would not name my child a bastard and sign away my lands and goods to yonder abbot, the murderer of my father and perhaps of my husband. Oh, listen, listen, you and all the folk here, and briefly as I may, I will tell my tale. Have I your leave to speak?" The commissioner nodded, and she set out her story from the beginning, so sweetly, so simply, and with such truth and earnestness, that the concourse of people packed close about her, hung upon her every word, and even Dr. Lay's coarse face softened as he heard. For the half of an hour or more she spoke, telling of her father's death, of her flight and marriage, of the burning of Cranwell Towers, and her widowing, if such it were, of her imprisonment in the priory, and the abbot's dealings with her and Emlyn, of the birth of her child, and its attempted murder by the midwife, his creature, of their trial and condemnation, they being innocent, and of all they had endured that day. "If you are innocent," shouted a priest, as she paused for breath, "what was that thing dressed in the livery of Satan, which worked evil at Blossholme? Did we not see it with our eyes?" Just then someone uttered an exclamation, and pointed to the shadow of the trees, where a strange form was moving. Another moment, and it came out into the light. One more, and all that multitude scattered like frightened sheep, rushing this way and that. Yes, even the horses took the bits between their teeth and bolted. For there, visible to all, Satan himself strolled towards them. On his head were horns, behind his back hung down a tail, his body was shaggy like a beast's, and his face hideous and of many colors, while in his hand he held a pronged fork with a long handle. This way and that rushed the throng. Only the commissioner, who had dismounted, stood still, perhaps because he was too afraid to stir, and with him the women, and some of the nuns, including the prioress, who fell upon their knees and began to utter prayers. On came the dreadful thing, till it reached the king's visitor, bowing to him, and bellowing like a bull, then very deliberately untied some strings, and let its horrid garb fall off, revealing the person of Thomas Bull. "What means this mummery, knave?" gasped Dr. Lay. "Mummery, do you call it, sir?" answered Thomas, with a grin. "Well, if so, 'tis on the faith of such mummery that priests burn women in merry England. Come, good people, come!" he roared in his great voice. "Come, see Satan in the flesh. Here are his horns," and he held them up. "Once they grew upon the head of Widow Johnson's billy goat. Here's his tail. Many a fly has it flicked off the belly of an abbey cow. Here's his ugly mug, begotten of parchment and the paint-box. Here's his dreadful fork that drives the damned to some hotter corner. It has been death to whole stones of eels down in the marsh fleet yonder. I have some hellfire too among the bag of tricks. You'll make the best of brimstone in a little oil dried out upon the hearth. Come, see the devil all complete, and naught to pay." Back trooped the crowd a little fearfully, taking the properties which he held, and handling them, till first one, and then all of them, began to laugh. "Laugh not," shouted Bull. "Is it a matter of laughter that noble ladies and others whose lives are as dear to some," and he glanced at Emlyn, "should grill like herrings because a poor fool walks abroad clad in skins to keep out the cold and frighten villains? Hark you, I played this trick. I am Beelzebub, also the ghost of Sir John Fotherell. I entered the priory chapel by a passage that I know, and saved yonder babe from murder, and scared the murderess down to hell. Yes, from the sham devil to the true. Why did I do it? Well, to protect the innocent and scourge the wicked in his pride. But the wicked seized the innocent, and the innocent said nothing, fearing lest I should suffer with them, and, oh God, you know the rest. It was a near thing, a very near thing, but I'm not the half-wit I've feigned to be for years. Moreover, I had a good horse and a heavy axe, and there are still true hearts round Blossholme. The dead men that lie yonder show it. Heaven has still its angels on the earth, though they wear strange shapes. There stands one of them, and there another." And he pointed first to the fat and pompous visitor, and next to the dishevelled prioress, adding, "And now, Sir Commissioner, for all that I have done in the cause of justice, I ask pardon of you who wear the king's grace and majesty, as I wore old Nick's horns and hoofs, since otherwise the abbot and his hired butchers, who hold themselves masters of king and people, will murder me for this, as they have done by better men. Therefore pardon, your mightiness, pardon." And he kneeled down before him. "You have it, Bull. In the king's name, you have it," replied Lay, who was more flattered by the titles and attributes poured upon him by the cunning Thomas than a closer consideration might have warranted. "For all that you have done or left undone, I, the commissioner of his grace, declare that you shall go scot-free, and that no action, criminal or civil, shall lie against you, and this my secretary shall give to you in writing. Now, good fellow, rise, but steal Satan's plumes no more, lest you should feel his claws and beak, for he is an ill fowl to mock. Bring hither that Spaniard Malden. I have somewhat to say to him." Now they looked this way and that, but no abbot could they see. The guards swore that they had never taken eye off him, even when they all ran before the devil, yet certainly he was gone. "The knave has given us the slip," bellowed the commissioner, who was purple with rage. "Search for him, seize him, for which my command shall be your warrant. Draw the wood. I'll to the abbey, where perchance the fox has gone to earth. 5 golden crowns to the man who nets the slimy traitor." Now everyone, burning with zeal to show their loyalty and to win the crowns, scattered on the search, so that presently the 3 witches, Thomas Bull, Mother Matilda, and the nuns, were left standing almost alone, and staring at each other and the dead and wounded men who lay about. "Let us to the priory," said Mother Matilda, "for by the sun I judge that it is time for evening prayer, and there seem to be none to hinder us." Thomas went to her horse, which grazed close at hand, and led it up. "Nay, good friend," she exclaimed with energy, "while I live, no more of that evil beast for me. Henceforth I'll walk till I am carried. Keep it, Thomas, as a gift. It is bought and paid for. Sister, your arm." "Have I done well, Emlyn?" Bull asked, as he tightened the girths. "I don't know," she answered, looking at him sideways. "You played the cur at first, leaving us to burn for your sins, but afterwards, well, you found the wits you say you never lost. Also your manners mended, and yonder captain knave learned that you can handle an axe, so we'll say no more about it, lad, for doubtless that abbot and his spies were sore taskmasters, and broke your spirit with their penances and talk of hell to come. Here, lift my lady onto this horse, for she is spent, and let me lean upon your shoulder, Thomas. It's weary work standing at a stake." Cicely's recollections of the remainder of that day were always shadowy and tangled. She remembered a prayer of thanksgiving in which she took small part with her lips, she whose heart was one great thanksgiving. She remembered the good sister who had given them the relics of St. Catherine, assuring her, as she received them back with care, that these and these alone had worked the miracle and saved their lives. She remembered eating food and straining her boy to her breast, and then she remembered no more till she woke to see the morning sun streaming into that same room whence on the previous day they had been led out to suffer the most horrible of deaths. Yes, she woke, and see, nearby was Emlyn, making ready her garments, as she had done these many years, and at her side lay the boy crowing in the sunlight and waving his little arms, the blessed boy who knew not the terrors he had passed. At first she thought that she had dreamed a very evil dream, till by degrees all the truth came back to her, and she shivered at its memory. Yes, even as the weight of it rolled off her heart, she shivered and whitened like an aspen in the wind. Then she rose and thanked God for his mercies, which were great. Oh, if the strength of that horse of Thomas Bull's had failed one short 5 minutes sooner, she, in whom the red blood still ran so healthily, would have been but a handful of charred bones. Or if her faith had left her so that she had yielded to the abbot and shortened all his talk at the place of burning, then Bull would have come too late. But it proved sufficient to her need, and for this also truly she should be thankful to its giver. After they had eaten, a message came to them from the prioress, who desired to see them in her chamber. Thither they went, rejoiced to find that they were no longer prisoners, but had liberty to come and go, and found her seated in a tall chair, for she was too stiff to walk. Cicely ran to her, knelt down and kissed her, and she laid her left hand upon her head in blessing, for the right was cut with the chafing of the reins. "Surely, Cicely," she said, smiling, "it is I who should kneel to you, were I in any state to do so, for now I have heard all the tale, and it seems that we have a prophetess among us, one favored with visions from on high, which visions have been most marvelously fulfilled." "That is so, mother," she answered briefly, for this was a matter of which she would never talk at length, either then or thereafter. "But the fulfillment came through you." "My daughter, I was but the minister. You were the chosen seer. Still let the holy business lie awhile. Perhaps you will tell me of it afterwards, and meantime the world and its affairs press us hard. Your deliverance has been bought at no small cost, my daughter, for knowing that yonder coarse and ungodly man, the king's visitor, told me as we rode that this nunnery must be dissolved, its house and revenues seized, and I and my sisters turned out to starve in our old age. Indeed, to bring him here at all, I was forced to petition that it might be so in a writing that I signed. See, then, how great is my love for you, dear Cicely." "Mother," she answered, "it cannot be, it shall not be." "Alas, child, how will you prevent it? These visitors, and those who commission them, are hungry folk. I hear they take the lands and goods of poor religious such as we are, and if these are fortunate, give 1 or 2 of them a little pittance to get bread. Once I had moneys of my own, but I spent them to buy back the valley farm which the abbot had seized, and of late to satisfy his extortions." And she wept a little. "Mother, listen. I have wealth hidden away, I know not where exactly, but Emlyn knows. It is my very own, the Carfax jewels that came to me from my mother. It was because of these that we were brought to the stake, since the abbot offered us life in return for them, and when it was too late to save us, a more merciful end than that by fire. But I forbade Emlyn to yield the secret. Something in my heart told me to do so. Now I know why. Mother, the price of those gems shall buy back your lands, and mayhap buy also permission from his grace the king for the continuance of your house, where you and yours shall worship as those who went before you have done for many generations. I swear it in my own name, and in that of my child, and of my husband also, if he lives. Your husband, if he lives, might need this wealth, sweet Cicely. Then, mother, except to save his life, or liberty, or honor, I tell you I will refuse it to him, who, when he learns what you have done for me and our son, would give it you, and all else he has besides, nay, would pay it as an honorable debt. Well, Cicely, in God's name, and my own, I thank you, and we'll see. Only be advised, lest Dr. Lay should learn of this treasure. But where is it, Emlyn? Fear not to tell me, who can be secret, for it is well that more than one should know, and I think that your danger is past. Yes, speak, Emlyn, said Cicely, for though I never asked before, fearing my own weakness, I am curious. None can hear us here. Then, mistress, I will tell you. You remember that on the day of the burning of Cranwell we sought refuge in the central tower, whence I carried you senseless to the vault. Now in that vault we lay all night, and while you swooned I searched with my fingers, till I found a stone that time and damp had loosened, behind which was a hollow. In that hollow I hid the jewels that I carried wrapped in silk, in the bosom of my robe. Then I filled up the hole with dust, scraped from the floor, and replaced the stone, wedging it tight with bits of mortar. It is the third stone, counting from the eastern angle, in the second course, above the floor line. There I set them, and there doubtless they lie to this day, for unless the tower is pulled down to its foundations, none will ever find them in that masonry. At this moment there came a knocking on the door. When it was opened by Emlyn, a nun entered, saying that the king's visitor demanded to speak with the prioress. "Show him here, since I cannot come to him," said Mother Matilda. "And you, Cicely and Emlyn, bide with me, for in such company it is well to have witnesses." A minute later Dr. Lay appeared, accompanied by his secretaries, gorgeously attired, and puffing from the stairs. To business, he said, scarcely stopping to acknowledge the greetings of the prioress. "Your convent is sequestrated upon your own petition, madam, therefore I need not stop to make the usual inquiries, and indeed I will admit that from all I hear it has a good repute, for none allege scandal against you, perhaps because you are all too old for such follies. Produce now your deeds, your terrier of lands, and your rent rolls, that I may take them over in due form, and dissolve the sisterhood." "I will send for them, sir," answered the prioress humbly, "but, meanwhile, tell us what we poor religious are to do. I am turned 60 years of age, and have dwelt in this house for 40 of them. None of my sisters are young, and some of them are older than myself. Whither shall we go?" "Into the world, madam, which you will find a fine, large place. Cease snuffling prayers, and from all vulgar superstitions. By the way, forget not to hand over any reliquaries of value, or any papistical emblems in precious metals, that you may possess, including images, of which my secretaries will take account, and go out into the world. Marry there if you can find husbands, follow useful trades there, do what you will there, and thank the king who frees you from the encumbrance of silly vows, and from the circle of a convent's walls." "To give us liberty to starve outside of them. Sir, do you understand your work? For hundreds of years we have sat at Blossholme, and during all those generations have prayed to God for the souls of men, and ministered to their bodies. We have done no harm to any creature, and what wealth came to us from the earth, or from the benefactions of the pious, we have dispersed with a liberal hand, taking nothing for ourselves. The poor by multitudes have fed at our gates, their sick we have nursed, their children we have taught. Often we have gone hungry, that they might be full. Now you drive us forth in our age to perish. If that is the will of God, so be it. But what must chance to England's poor?" "That is England's business, madam, and the poor's. Meanwhile, I have told you that I have no time to waste, since I must away to London to make report concerning this abbot of yours, a veritable rogue, of whose villainous plots I have discovered many things. I pray you send a messenger to bid them hurry with the deeds." Just then a nun entered bearing a tray, on which were cakes and wine. Emlyn took it from her, and pouring the wine into cups, offered them to the visitor and his secretaries. "Good wine," he said, after he had drunk, "a very generous wine. You nuns know the best in liquor. Be careful, I pray you, to include it in your inventory. Why, woman, are you not one of those whom that abbot would have burnt? Yes, and there is your mistress, Dame Fotterel, or Dame Harfleet, with whom I desire a word. I am at your service, sir, said Cicely. Well, madam, you and your servant have escaped the stake, to which, as near as I can judge, you were sentenced upon no evidence at all. Still, you were condemned by a competent ecclesiastical court, and under that condemnation you must therefore remain until, or unless, the king pardons you. My judgment is, then, that you stay here awaiting his command. But, sir, said Cicely, if the good nuns who have befriended me are to be driven forth, how can I dwell on in their house alone? Yet you say I must not leave it, and indeed, if I could, whither should I go? My husband's hall is burnt, my own the abbot holds. Moreover, if I bide here, in this way or in that, he will have my life. The knave is fled away, said Dr. Lay, rubbing his fat chin. Ay, but he will come back again, or his people will, and, sir, you know these Spaniards are good haters, and I have defied him long. Oh, sir, I crave the protection of the king for my child's sake, and my own, and for Emlyn Stower also. The commissioner went on, rubbing his chin. You can give much evidence against this Malden, can you not? He asked at length. Ay, broke in Emlyn, enough to hang him 10 times over, and so can I. And you have large estates which he has seized, have you not? I have, sir, who am of no mean birth and station. Lady, he said, with more deference in his voice, step aside with me. I would speak with you privately. And he walked to the window, where she followed him. Now tell me, what was the value of these properties of yours? I know not rightly, sir, but I have heard my father say about 300 pounds a year. His manner became more deferential still, since for those days such wealth was great. Indeed, my lady, a large sum. A very comfortable fortune, if you can get it back. Now I will be frank with you. The king's commissioners are not well paid, and their costs are great. If I so arrange your matters that you come to your own again, and that the judgment of witchcraft pronounced against you and your servant is annulled, will you promise to pay me 1 year's rent of these estates, to meet the various expenses I must incur on your behalf? Now it was Cicely's turn to think. Surely, she answered at length, if you will add a condition, that these good sisters shall be left undisturbed in their nunnery. He shook his fat head. It is not possible now. The thing is too public. Why, the Lord Cromwell would say I had been bribed, and I might lose my office. Well, then, went on Cicely, if you will promise that 1 year of grace shall be given to them to make arrangements for their future. That I can do, he answered, nodding, on the ground that they are of blameless life, and have protected you from the king's enemy. But this is an uncertain world. I must ask you to sign an indenture, and its form will be that you acknowledge to have received from me a loan of 300 pounds, to be repaid with interest when you recover your estates. Draw it up, and I will sign, sir. Good, madam, and now that we may get this business through, you will accompany me to London, where you will be safe from harm. Will not ride today, but tomorrow morning at the light. Then my servant Emlyn must come also, sir, to help me with the babe, and Thomas Bull too, for he can prove that the witchcraft upon which we were condemned was but his trickery. Yes, yes, but the costs of travel for so many will be great. Have you, perchance, any money? Yes, sir, about 50 pounds in gold, that is sewn up in one of Emlyn's robes. Ah, a sufficient sum. Too much indeed to be risked upon your person in these rough times. You will let me take charge of half of it for you? With pleasure, sir, trusting you as I do. Keep to your bargain, and I will keep to mine. Good. When Thomas Lay is fairly dealt with, Thomas Lay deals fairly. No man can say otherwise. This afternoon I will bring the deed, and you'll give me that 25 pounds in charge. Then, followed by Cicely, he returned to where the prioress sat, and said, Mother Matilda, for so I understand you are called in religion, the Lady Harfleet has been pleading with me for you, and because you have dealt so well by her, I have promised in the king's name that you and your nuns shall live on here undisturbed for 1 year from this day, after which you must yield up peaceable possession to his majesty, whom I will beg that you shall be pensioned. I thank you, sir, the prioress answered. When one is old, a year of grace is much, and in a year many things may happen. For instance, my death. Thank me not, a plain man who but follows after justice and duty. The documents for your signature shall be ready this afternoon, And, by the way, the Lady Harfleet and her servant, also that stout, shrewd fellow, Thomas Bull, ride with me to London tomorrow morning. She will explain all. At 3 of the clock I wait upon you." The visitor and his secretaries bustled out of the room as pompously as they had entered, and when they had gone, Cicely explained to Mother Matilda and Emmeline what had passed. "I think you have done wisely," said the prioress, when she had listened. "That man is a shark, but better give him your little finger than your whole body. Certainly you have bargained well for us, for what may not happen in a year. Also, dear Cicely, you will be safer in London than at Blossholme, since with the great sum of £300 to gain, that commissioner will watch you like the apple of his eye, and push your cause." "Unless someone promises him the greater sum of £1,000 to scotch it," interrupted Emmeline. "Well, there was but one road to take, and paper promises are little, though I grudge the good £25 in gold. Meanwhile, mother, we have much to make ready. I pray you send someone to find Thomas Bull, who will not be far away, for since we are no longer prisoners, I wish to go out walking with him on an errand of my own that perchance you can guess. Wealth may be useful in London town for all our sakes. Also, horses and a pack-beast must be got, and other things." In due course Thomas Bull was found fast asleep in a neighbour's house, for after his adventures and triumph he had drunk hard and rested long. When she discovered the truth, Emmeline rated him well, calling him a beer-tub and not a man, and many other hard names, till at last she provoked him to answer, that had it not been for the said beer-tub, she would be but ash-dust this day. Thereon she turned the talk, and told him their needs, and that he must ride with them to London. To this he replied that good horses should be saddled by the dawn, for he knew where to lay hands on them, since some were left in the abbot's stables that wanted exercise. Further, that he would be glad to leave Blossholme for a while, where he had made enemies on the yesterday, whose friends yet lay wounded or unburied. After this Emmeline whispered something into his ear, to which he nodded assent, saying that he would bustle round and be ready. That afternoon Emmeline went out riding with Thomas Bull, who was fully armed, as she said, to try 2 of the horses that should carry them on the morrow, and it was late when she returned out of the dark night. "Have you got them?" asked Cicely, when they were together in their room. "Ay," she answered, "every one, but some stones have fallen, and it was hard to win an entrance to that vault. Indeed, had it not been for Thomas Bull, who has the strength of a bull, I could never have done it. Moreover, the abbot has been there before us, and dug over every inch of the floor. But the fool never thought of the wall, so all's well. I'll sew half of them into my petticoat, and half into yours, to share the risk. In case of thieves, the money that hungry visitor has left to us, for I paid him over half when you signed the deed, we will carry openly in pouches upon our girdles. They'll not search further. Oh, I forgot. I've something more besides the jewels. Here it is." And she produced a packet from her bosom, and laid it on the table. "What's this?" asked Cicely, looking suspiciously at the worn sailcloth in which it was wrapped. "How can I tell? Cut it and see. All I know is that when I stood at the nunnery door, as Thomas led away the horses, a man crept on me out of the rain, swathed in a great cloak, and asked if I were not Emmeline Stower. I said yea, whereon he thrust this into my hand, bidding me not fail to give it to the Lady Harfleet, and was gone." "It has an overseas look about it," murmured Cicely, as with eager, trembling fingers she cut the stitches. At length they were undone, and a sealed inner wrapping also, revealing, amongst other documents, a little packet of parchments, covered with crabbed, unreadable writing, on the back of which, however, they could decipher the names of Shefton and Blossholme by reason of the larger letters in which they were engrossed. Also there was a writing in the scrawling hand of Sir John Fotterell, and at the foot of it his name, and, amongst others, those of Father Necton and of Geoffrey Stokes. Cicely stared at the deeds, then said, "Emmeline, I know these parchments. They are those that my father took with him when he rode for London to disprove the abbot's claim, and with them the evidence of the traitorous words he spoke last year at Shefton. Yes, this inner wrapping is my own. I took it from the store of worn linen in the passage cupboard. But how came they here?" Emmeline made no answer, only lifted the wrappings and shook them, whereon a strip of paper that they had not seen fell to the table. "This may tell us," she said. "Read, if you can. It has words on its inner side." Cicely snatched at it, and as the writing was clear and clerkly, read with ease, save for the chokings of her throat. It ran: My Lady Harfleet, these are the papers that Geoffrey Stokes saved when your father fell. They were given for safekeeping to the writer of these words, far away across the sea, and he hands them on unopened. Your husband lives and is well again, also Geoffrey Stokes, and though they have been hindered on their journey, doubtless he will find his way back to England, whither, believing you to be dead, as I did, he has not hurried. There are reasons why I, his friend and yours, cannot see you or write more, since my duty calls me hence. When it is finished I will seek you out if I still live. If not, wait in peace until your joy finds you, as I think it will. One who loves your lord well, and for his sake you also. Cicely laid down the paper, and burst into a flood of weeping. Oh, cruel, cruel, she sobbed, to tell so much and yet so little. Nay, what an ungrateful wretch am I, since Christopher truly lives, and I also live to learn it, I, whom he deems dead. By my soul, said Emmeline, when she had calmed her, that cloaked man is a prince of messengers. Oh, had I but known what he bore, I'd have had all the story, if I must cling to him like Potiphar's wife to Joseph. Well, well, Joseph got away, and half a herring is better than no fish. Also, this is good herring. Moreover, you have got the deeds when you most wanted them, and what is better, a written testimony that will bring the traitor Malden to the scaffold. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 14. Jacob and the Jewels. Cicely's journey to London was strange enough to her, who never before had travelled farther than 50 miles from her home, and but once as a child spent a month in a town when visiting an aunt at Lincoln. She went in ease, it is true, for Commissioner Lay did not love hard travelling, and for this reason they started late and halted early, either at some good inn, if in those days any such places could be called good, or perhaps in a monastery where he claimed of the best that the frightened monks had to offer. Indeed, as she observed, his treatment of these poor folk was cruel, for he blustered and threatened and inquired, accusing them often of crimes that they had not committed, and finally, although he had no mission to them at the time, extracted great gifts, saying that if these were not forthcoming, he would make a note and return later. Also he got hold of talebearers, and wrote down all their scandalous and lying stories told against those whose bread they ate. Thus, long before they saw Charing Cross, Cicely came to hate this proud, avaricious, and overbearing man, who hid a savage nature under a cloak of virtue, and whilst serving his own ends, mouthed great words about God and the king. Still, she who was schooled in adversity learned to hide her heart, fearing to make an enemy of one who could ruin her, and forced Emmeline, much against her will, to do the same. Moreover, there were worse things than that, since, being beautiful, some of his companions talked to her in a way she could not misunderstand, till at length Thomas Bull, coming on one of them, thrashed him as he had never been thrashed before, after which there was trouble that was only appeased by a gift. Yet on the whole things went well. No one molested the king's visitor or those with him. The autumn weather held fine, the baby boy kept his health, and the country through which they passed was new to her and full of interest. At last one evening they rode from Barnet into the great city, which she thought a most marvellous place, who had never seen such a multitude of houses or of men running to and fro about their business, up and down the narrow streets that at night were lit with lamps. Now there had been a great discussion where they were to lodge, Dr. Lay saying that he knew of a house suitable to them. But Emmeline would not hear of this place, where she was sure they would be robbed, for the wealth that they carried secretly in jewels bore heavily on her mind. Remembering a cousin of her mother's of the name of Smith, a goldsmith, who till within a year or two before was alive and dwelling in Cheapside, she said that they would seek him out. Thither then they rode, guided by one of the visitor's clerks, not he whom Bull had beaten, but another, and at last, after some search, found a dingy house in a court, and over it a sign on which were painted 3 balls and the name of Jacob Smith. Emlyn dismounted, and, the door being open, entered, to be greeted by an old, white-bearded man with horn spectacles thrust up over his forehead, and dark eyes like her own, since the same gypsy blood ran strong in both of them. What passed between them Cicely did not hear, but presently the old man came out with Emlyn, and looked her and Bull up and down sharply for a long while, as though to take their measures. At length he said that he understood from his cousin, whom he now saw for the first time for over 30 years, that the two of them and their man desired lodgings, which, as he had empty rooms, he would be pleased to give them, if they would pay the price. Cicely asked how much this might be, and on his naming a sum, 10 silver shillings a week for the 3 of them and their horses, that would be stabled close by, told Emlyn to pay him £1 on account. This he took, biting the gold to see that it was good, but bidding them in to inspect the rooms before he pouched it. They did so, and finding them clean and commodious, if somewhat dark, closed the bargain with him, after which they dismissed the clerk to take their address to Dr. Lay, who had promised to advise them so soon as he could put their business forward. When he was gone, and Thomas Bull, conducted by Smith's apprentice, had led off the 3 horses and the pack-beast, the old man changed his manner, and conducting them into a parlour at the back of his shop, sent his housekeeper, a middle-aged woman with a pleasant face, to make ready food for them, while he produced cordials from squat Dutch bottles, which he made them drink. Indeed, he was all kindness to them, being, as he explained, rejoiced to see one of his own blood, for he had no relations living, his wife and their 2 children having died in one of the London sicknesses. Also he was Blossholme born, though he had left that place 50 years before, and had known Cicely's grandfather, and played with her father when he was a boy. So he plied them with question after question, some of which they thought it wise not to answer, for he was a merry and talkative old man. "Aha!" he said, "you would prove me before you trust me, and who can blame you in this naughty world? But perhaps I know more about you all than you think, since in this trade my business is to learn many things. For instance, I have heard that there was a great trying of witches down at Blossholme lately, whereat a certain abbot came off worst. Also, that the famous Carfax jewels had been lost, which vexed the said holy abbot. They were jewels indeed, or so I have heard, for among them were 2 pink pearls worth a king's ransom, or so I have heard. Great pity that they should be lost, since my lady there would own them otherwise, and much should I have liked, who am a little man in that trade, to set my old eyes upon them. Well, well, perhaps I shall yet, for that which is lost is sometimes found again. Now here comes your dinner. Eat, eat. We'll talk afterwards." This was the first of many pleasant meals which they shared with their host, Jacob Smith. Soon Emlyn found from inquiries that she made among his neighbours, without seeming to do so, that this cousin of hers bore an excellent name, and was trusted by all. "Then why should we not trust him also?" asked Cicely, "who must find friends, and put faith in someone." "Even with the jewels, mistress?" "Even with the jewels, for such things are his business, and they would be safer in his strong chest than tacked into our garments, where the thought of them haunts me night and day." "Let us wait a while," said Emlyn, "for once they were in that box, how do we know if we should get them out again?" On the morrow of this talk, the visitor Lay came to see them, and had no cheerful tale to tell. According to him, the Lord Cromwell declared that as the abbot of Blossholme claimed these Shefton estates, the king stood, or soon would stand, in the shoes of the said abbot of Blossholme, and therefore the king claimed them, and could not surrender them. Moreover, money was so wanted at court just then, and here Lay looked hard at them, that there could be no talk of parting with anything of value except in return for a consideration, and he looked at them harder still. "And how can my lady give that?" broke in Emlyn sharply, for she feared lest Cicely should commit herself. "To-day she is but a homeless pauper, save for a few pounds in gold, and even if she should come to her own again, as your worship knows, her first year's profits are all promised." "Ah," said the doctor sadly, "doubtless the case is hard, only," he added, with cunning emphasis, "a tale has just reached me that the Lady Harfleet has wealth hidden away which came to her from her mother, trinkets of value, and such things." Now Cicely coloured, for the man's little eyes pierced her like gimlets, and her powers of deceit were very small. But this was not so with Emlyn, who, as she said, could play thief to catch a thief. "Listen, sir," she said, with a secret air. "You have heard true. They were some things of value. Why should we hide it from you, our good friend? But alas, that greedy rogue, the abbot of Blossholme, has them. He stripped my poor lady as bare as a fowl for roasting. Get them back from him, sir, and on her behalf, I say shall give you half of them. Will you not, my lady?" "Surely," said Cicely. "The doctor, to whom we owe so much, will be most welcome to the half of any movables of mine that he can recover from the abbot Malden." And she paused, for the fib struck in her throat. Moreover, she knew herself to be the colour of a peony. Happily, the commissioner did not notice her blushes, or if he did, he put them down to grief and anger. "The abbot Malden," he grumbled. "Always the abbot Malden. Oh, what a wicked thief must be that high-stomached Spaniard, who does not scruple first to make orphans and then to rob them! A black-hearted traitor, too! Do you know that at this moment he stirs up rebellion in the north? Well, I'll see him on the rack before I have done. Have you a list of those movables, madam?" Cicely said no, and Emmeline added that one should be made from memory. "Good! I'll see you again tomorrow or the next day, and meanwhile, fear not, I'll be as active in your business as a cat after a sparrow. Oh, my rat of a Spanish abbot, you wait till I get my claws into your fat back. Farewell, my Lady Harfleet, farewell, Mistress Stower, I must away to deal with other priests almost as wicked." And he departed, still muttering objurgations on the abbot. "Now I think the time has come to trust Jacob Smith," said Emmeline, when the door closed behind him. "For he may be honest, whereas this doctor is certainly a villain. Also, the man has heard something, and suspects us. Ah, there you are, Cousin Smith. Come in, if you please, since we desire to talk with you for a minute. Come in, and be so good as to lock the door behind you." 5 minutes later, all the jewels, whereof not one was wanting, lay on the table before old Jacob, who stared at them with round eyes. "The Carfax gems," he muttered, "the Carfax gems of which I have so often heard, those that the old Crusader brought from the East, having sacked them from a sultan, from the East where they talk of them still, a sultan's wealth, unless, indeed, they came straight from the New Jerusalem, and were an angel's gods. And do you say that you 2 women have carried these priceless things tacked in your cloaks, which, as I have seen, you throw down here and there, and leave behind you? Oh, fools, fools, even among women incomparable fools! Fellow travellers with Dr. Lay also, who would rob a baby of its bauble." "Fools or no," exclaimed Emmeline tartly, "we have got them safe enough after they had run some risks, as I pray that you may keep them, Cousin Smith." Old Jacob threw a cloth over the gems, and slowly transferred them to his pocket. "This is an upper floor," he explained, "and the door is locked, yet some one might put a ladder up to the window. Were I on the street, I should know by the glitter in the light that there were precious things here. Stay, they are not safe in my pocket even for an hour." And going to the wall, he did something to a panel in the wainscot, causing it to open, and reveal a space behind it, where lay sundry wrapped up parcels, among which he placed, not all, but a portion of the gems. Then he went to other panels, that opened likewise, showing more parcels, and in the holes behind these he distributed the rest of the treasure. "There, foolish women," he said, "since you have trusted me, I will trust you. You have seen my big strong boxes in my office, and doubtless thought I keep all my little wares there. Well, so does every thief in London, for they have searched them twice, and gained some store of pewter. I remember that some of it was discovered again in the king's household. But behind these panels all is safe, though no woman would ever have thought of a device so simple and so sure." For a moment Emmeline could find no answer, perhaps because of her indignation, but Cicely asked sweetly, "Do you ever have fires in London, Master Smith? It seems to me that I have heard of such things, and then, in a hurry, you know." Smith thrust up his horn spectacles and looked at her in mild astonishment. "To think," he said, "that I should live to learn wisdom out of the mouth of babes and sucklers." "Sucklings," suggested Cicely. "Sucklers or sucklings, it means the same thing, women," he replied testily, then added, with a chuckle, "Well, well, my lady, you are right. You have caught out Jacob at his own game. I never thought of fire, though it is true we had one next door last year, when I ran out with my bed and forgot all about the gold and stones. I'll have new hiding places made in the masonry of the cellar, where no fire would hurt. Ah, you women would never have thought of that, who carry treasure sewn up in a night shift." Now Emmeline could bear it no longer. "And how would you have us carry it, Cousin Smith?" she asked indignantly. "Tied about our necks, or hanging from our heels? Well do I remember my mother telling me that you were always a simple youth, and that your saint must have been a very strong one who brought you safe to London and showed you how to earn a living there, or else that you had married a woman of excellent intelligence, though it is plain now she has long been dead. Well, well, she added with a laugh, cling to your man's vanities, you son of woman, and since you are so clever, give us of your wisdom, for we need it. But first let me tell you that I have rescued those very jewels from a fire, and by hiding them in masonry in a vault. It is the fashion of the female to wrangle when she has the worst of the case, said Jacob, with a twinkle in his eye. So, daughter of man, set out your trouble. Perchance the wisdom that I have inherited from my mothers straight back to Eve may help that which your mothers lacked. Now have done with jests. I listen, if it pleases you to tell me. So, having first invoked the curse of heaven on him, if ever he should breathe a word, Emlyn, with the help of Cicely, repeated the whole matter from the beginning, and the candles were lighted ere ever her tale was done. All this while Jacob Smith sat opposite to them, saying little, save now and again to ask a shrewd question. At length, when they had finished, he exclaimed, "Truly, women are fools." "We have heard that before, Master Smith," replied Cicely, "but this time, why?" "Not to have unbosomed to me before, which would have saved you a week of time, although, as it happens, I knew more of your story than you chose to tell, and therefore the days have not been altogether wasted. Well, to be brief, this Dr. Lay is a ravenous rogue." "Oh, Solomon, to have discovered that!" ejaculated Emlyn. "One whose only aim is to line his nest with your feathers, some of which you have promised him, as indeed you were right to do. Now he has got wind of these jewels, which is not wonderful, seeing that such things cannot be hid. If you buried them in a coffin 6 foot underground, still they would shine through the solid earth and declare themselves. This is his plan, to strip you of everything ere his master, Cromwell, gets a hold of you. And if you go to him empty-handed, what chance has your suit with Vicar General Cromwell, the hungriest shark of all, save one?" "We understand," said Emlyn. "But what is your plan, cousin Smith?" "Mine? I don't know that I have one. Still, here is that which might do. Though I seem so small and humble, I am remembered at court, when money is wanted, and just now much money is wanted, for soon they will be in arms in Yorkshire, and therefore I am much remembered. Now, if you care to give Dr. Lay the go-by, and leave your cause to me, perhaps I might serve you as cheaply as another." "At what charge?" blurted out Emlyn. The old man turned on her indignantly, asking, "Cousin, how have I defrauded you, or your mistress, that you should insult me to my face? Go to, you do not trust me. Go to with your jewels, and seek some other helper." And he went to the panelling as though to collect them again. "Nay, nay, Master Smith," said Cicely, catching him by the arm. "Be not angry with Emlyn. Remember that of late we have learned in a hard school, with Abbot Malden and Dr. Lay for masters. At least I trust you, so forsake me not, who have no other to whom to turn in all my troubles, which are many." And as she spoke, the great tears that had gathered in her blue eyes fell upon the child's face, and woke him, so that she must turn aside to quiet him, which she was glad to do. "Grieve not," said the kind-hearted old man, in distress. "'Tis I should grieve, whose brutal words have made you weep. Moreover, Emlyn is right. Even foolish women should not trust the first Jack with whom they take a lodging. Still, since you swear that you do in your kindness, I'll try show myself not all unworthy, my Lady Harfleet. Now, what is it you want from the king? Justice on the abbot? That you'll get for nothing, for his grace can give it, for this same abbot stirs up rebellion against him. No need, therefore, to set out his past misdeeds. A clean title to your large inheritance, which the abbot claims? That will be more difficult, since the king claims through him. At best, money must be paid for it. A declaration that your marriage is good, and your boy born in lawful wedlock? Not so hard, but will cost something. The annulment of the sentence of witchcraft on you both? Easy, for the abbot passed it. Is there aught more?" "Yes, Master Smith, the good nuns who befriended me. I would save their house and lands to them. Those jewels are pledged to do it, if it can be done." "A matter of money, lady, a mere matter of money. You will have to buy the property, that is all. Now let us see what it will cost, if fortune goes with me." And he took pen and paper and began to write down figures. Finally he rose, sighing, and shaking his head. £2,000, he groaned. "A vast sum, but I can't lessen it by a shilling. There are so many to be bought. Yes, £1,000 in gifts, and £1,000 as loan to his Majesty, who does not repay." "£2,000!" exclaimed Cicely in dismay. "Oh, how shall I find so much, whose first year's rents are already pledged?" "Know you the worth of those jewels?" asked Jacob, looking at her. "Nay, the half of that, perhaps." "Let us say double that, and then right cheap." "Well, if so," replied Cicely, with a gasp, "where shall we sell them? Who has so much money?" "I'll try to find it, or what is needful. Now, Cousin Emlyn," he added sarcastically, "you see where my profit lies. I buy the gems at half their value, and the rest I keep." "In your own words, go to," said Emlyn, "and keep your jibes until we have more leisure." The old man thought a while, and said, "It grows late, but the evening is pleasant, and I think I need some air. That crack-brained, red-haired fellow of yours will watch you while I am gone, and for mercy's sake be careful with those candles. Nay, nay, you must have no fire, you must go cold. After what you said to me, I can think of naught but fire. It is for this night only. By tomorrow evening I'll prepare a place where Abbot Maldon himself might sit unscorched in the midst of hell. But till then make out with clothes. I have some furs in pledge that I will send up to you. It is your own fault, and in my youth we did not need a fire on an autumn day. No more, no more." And he was gone, nor did they see him again that night. On the following morning, as they sat at their breakfast, Jacob Smith appeared, and began to talk of many things, such as the badness of the weather, for it rained, the toughness of the ham, which he said was not to be compared to those they cured at Blossholme in his youth, and the likeness of the baby boy to his mother. "Indeed, no," broke in Cicely, who felt that he was playing with them. "He is his father's self. There is no look of me in him." "Oh," answered Jacob. "Well, I'll give my judgment when I see the father. By the way, let me read that note again which the cloaked man brought to Emlyn." Cicely gave it to him, and he studied it carefully, then said, in an indifferent voice, "The other day I saw a list of Christian captives, said to have been recovered from the Turks by the Emperor Charles at Tunis, and among them was one Hooflet, described as an English signor, and his servant. I wonder now—" Cicely sprang upon him. "Oh, cruel wretch," she said, "to have known this so long, and not to have told me!" "Peace, lady," he said, retreating before her. "I only learned it at 11 of the clock last night, when you were fast asleep. Yesterday is not this same day, and therefore 'tis the other day, is it not?" "Surely you might have woke me. But, Swift, where is he now?" "How can I know? Not here, at least. But the writing said—" "Well, what did the writing say?" "I am trying to think. My memory fails me at times. Perhaps you will find the same thing when you have my ears, should it please heaven." "Oh, that it might please heaven to make you speak! What said the writing?" "Ah, I have it now. It said, in a note appended amidst other news, for, did I tell you that this was a letter from his Grace's ambassador in Spain? And, oh, his is the vilest scrawl to read. Nay, hurry me not. It said that this Sir Hooflet, the ambassador has put a query against his name, and his servant, yes, I am sure it said his servant too, well, that they both of them, being angry at the treatment they had met with from the infidel Turks— no, I forgot to add, there were 3 of them, one a priest, who did otherwise. Well, as I said, being angry, they stopped there to serve with the Spaniards against the Turks till the end of that campaign. There, that is all." "How little is your all!" exclaimed Cicely. "Yet 'tis something. Oh, why should a married man stop across the seas to be revenged on poor ignorant Turks?" "Why should he not," interrupted Emlyn, "when he deems himself a widower, as does your lord?" "Yes, I forgot. He thinks me dead, who doubtless himself will be dead, if he is not so already, seeing that those wicked, murderous Turks will kill him." And she began to weep. "I should have added," said Jacob hastily, "that in a second letter, of later date, the ambassador declares that the Emperor's war against the Turks is finished for this season, and that the Englishmen who were with him fought with great honor, and were all escaped unharmed, though this time he gives no names." "All escaped! If my husband were dead, who cannot die meanly or without fame, how could he say that they were all escaped? Nay, he lives, though who knows if he will return? Perchance he will wander off elsewhere, or stay and wed again." "Impossible," said old Jacob, bowing to her. "Having called you wife, impossible." "Impossible," echoed Emlyn, "having such a score to settle with yonder Maldon. A man may forget his love, especially if he deems her buried, but as he stayed foreign to fight the Turk who wronged him, so he'll come home to fight the abbot, who ruined him and slew his bride." There followed a silence, which the goldsmith, who felt it somewhat painful, hastened to break, saying, "Yes, doubtless he will come home. For aught we know, he may be here already. But meanwhile we also have our score against this abbot, a bad one, though think not for his sake that all abbots are bad, for I have known some who might be counted angels upon earth, and, having gone to martyrdom, doubtless today are angels in heaven. Now, my lady, I will tell you what I have done, hoping that it will please you better than it does me. Last night I saw the Lord Cromwell, with whom I have many dealings, at his house in Austin Friars, and told him the case, of which, as I thought, that false villain Lay had said nothing to him, purposing to pick the plums out of the pudding ere he handed on the suet to his master. He read your deeds, and hunted up some petition from the abbot, with which he compared them, then made a note of my demands, and asked straight out, how much? I told him £1,000 on loan to the king, which would not be asked for back again, the said loan to be discharged by the grant to me, that is, to you, of all the abbey lands, in addition to your own, when the said abbey lands are sequestered, as they will be shortly. To this he agreed, on behalf of his grace, who needs money much, but inquired as to himself. I replied £500 for him and his jackals, including Dr. Lay, of which no account would be asked. He told me it was not enough, for after the jackals had their pickings, none would be left for him but the bones. I, who asked so much, must offer more, and he made as though to dismiss me. At the door I turned, and said I had a wonderful pink pearl that he, who loved jewels, might like to see, a pearl worth many abbeys. He said, show it, and oh, he gloated over it like a maid over her first love letter. If there were 2 of these now, he whispered. 2, my lord, I answered. There's no fellow to that pearl in the whole world, though it is true that as I said the words, the setting of its twin, that was pinned to my inner shirt, pricked me sorely, as if in anger. Then I took it up again, and for the second time began to bow myself out. Jacob, he said, you are an old friend, and I'll stretch my duty for you. Leave the pearl. His grace needs that £1,000 so sorely that I must keep it against my will. And he put out his hand to take it, only to find that I had covered it with my own. First the writing, then its price, my lord. Here is a memorandum of it set out fair, to save you trouble, if it pleases you to sign. He read it through, then, taking a pen, scored out the clause as regards acquittal of the witchcraft, which, he said, must be looked into by the king in person or by his officers, but all the rest he signed, undertaking to hand over the proper deeds under the great seal and the royal hand upon payment of £1,000. Being able to do no better, I said that would serve, and left him your pearl, he promising, on his part, to move his majesty to receive you, which I doubt not he will do quickly for the sake of the £1,000. Have I done well? Indeed, yes, exclaimed Cicely. Who else could have done half so well? As the words left her lips, there came a loud knocking at the door of the house, and Jacob ran down to open it. Presently he returned with a messenger in a splendid coat, who bowed to Cicely, and asked if she were the Lady Harfleet. On her replying that such was her name, he said that he bore to her the command of his grace the king to attend upon him at 3 o'clock of that afternoon at his palace of Whitehall, together with Emlyn Stower and Thomas Bull, there to make answer to his majesty concerning a certain charge of witchcraft that had been laid against her and them, which summons she would neglect at her peril. Sir, I will be there, answered Cicely, but tell me, do I come as a prisoner? Nay, replied the herald, since Master Jacob Smith, in whom his grace has trust, has consented to be answerable for you. And for the £1,000, muttered Jacob, as, with many salutations, he showed the royal messenger to the door, not neglecting to thrust a gold piece into the hand that he waved behind him in farewell. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 15. The Devil at Court. It was 2:30 of the clock when Cicely, who carried her boy in her arms, accompanied by Emlyn, Thomas Bull, and Jacob Smith, found herself in the great courtyard of the Palace of Whitehall. The place was full of people waiting there upon one business or another, through whom messengers and armed men thrust their path continually, crying, "Way! In the king's name, way!" So great was the press, indeed, that for some time even Jacob could command no attention, till at length he caught sight of the herald who had visited his house in the morning, and beckoned to him. "I was looking for you, Master Smith, and for the Lady Harfleet," the man said, bowing to her. "You have an appointment with his grace, have you not? But God knows if it can be kept. The antechambers are full of folk bringing news about the rebellion in the north, and of great lords and councillors who wait for commands or money, most of them for money. In short, the king has given order that all appointments are cancelled. He can see no one today. The Lord Cromwell told me so himself." Jacob took a gold angel from his pouch, and began to play with it between his fingers. "I understand, noble herald," he said. "Still, do you think that you could find me a messenger to the Lord Cromwell? If so, this trifle—" "I'll try, Master Smith," he answered, stretching out his hand for the piece of money. "But what is the message?" "Oh, say that Pink Pearl would learn from his lordship where he can lay hands upon £1,000 without interest." "A strange message, to which I will hazard an answer, nowhere," said the herald. "Yet I'll find some one to deliver it. Step within this archway, and wait out of the rain. Fear not, I will be back presently." They did as he bid them, gladly enough, for it had begun to drizzle, and Cicely was afraid lest her boy, with whom London did not agree too well, should take cold. Here, then, they stood amusing themselves in watching the motley throng that came and went. Bull, to whom the scene was strange, gaped at them with his mouth open. Emmeline took note of every one with her quick eyes, while old Jacob Smith whispered tales concerning individuals as they passed, most of which were little to their credit. As for Cicely, soon her thoughts were far away. She knew that she was at a crisis of her fortune, that if things went well with her this day she might look to be avenged upon her enemies, and to spend the rest of her life in wealth and honour. But it was not of such matters that she dreamed, whose heart was set on Christopher, without whom naught availed. Where was he, she wondered? If Jacob's tale were true, after passing many dangers, but a little while ago he lived and had his health. Yet in those times death came quickly, leaping like the lightning from unsuspected clouds, or even out of a clear sky, and who could say? Besides, he believed her gone, and that being so, would be careless of himself, or perchance, worst thought of all, would take some other wife, as was but right and natural. Oh, then indeed— At this moment a sound of altercation woke her to the world again, and she looked up to see that Thomas Bull was bringing trouble on them. A coarse fat lout, with a fiery and a knotted nose, being somewhat in liquor, had amused himself by making mock of his country looks and red hair, and asking whether they used him for a scarecrow in his native fields. Thomas bore it for a while, only answering with another question, whether he, the fat fellow, hired out his nose to London housewives to light their fires. The man, feeling that the laugh was against him, and noticing the child in Cicely's arms, pointed it out to his friends, inquiring whether they did not think it was exactly like its dad. Then Thomas's rage burnt up, although the jest was silly and aimless enough. "You low London gutter-hound!" he exclaimed. "I'll learn you to insult the Lady Harfleet with your ribald japes." And stretching out his big fist, he seized his enemy's purple nose in a grip of iron, and began to twist it till the sop roared with pain. Thereon guards ran up, and would have arrested Bull for breaking the peace in the king's palace. Indeed, arrested he must have been, notwithstanding all Jacob Smith could do to save him, had not at that moment a man appeared, at whose coming the crowd that had gathered separated, bowing. A man of middle age, with a quick, clever face, who wore rich clothes and a fur-trimmed velvet cap and gown. Cicely knew him at once for Cromwell, the greatest man in England after the king, and marked him well, knowing that he held her fate and that of her child in the hollow of his hand. She noted the thin-lipped mouth, small as a woman's, the sharp nose, the little brownish eyes set close together, and surrounded by wrinkled skin that gave him a cunning look, and noting was afraid. Before her stood a man who, though at present he seemed to be her friend, if he chanced to become her enemy, as once he had been bribed to be her father's, would show her no more pity than the spider shows a fly. Indeed she was right, for many were the flies that had been snared and sucked in the web of Cromwell, who, in his full tide of power and pomp, forgot the fate of his master, Wolsey, in his day a greater spider still. "What passes here?" Cromwell said, in a sharp voice. "Men, is this the place to brawl beneath his Grace's very windows? Ah, Master Smith, is it you? Explain." "My lord," answered Jacob, bowing, "this is the Lady Harfleet's servant, and he is not to blame. That fat knave insulted her, and, being quick-tempered, her man, Bull, rang his nose." "I see that he rang it. Look, he is ringing it still. Friend Bull, leave go, or presently you will have in your hand that which is of no value to you. Guard, take this beer-tub, and hold his head beneath the pump for 5 minutes by the clock to wash him, and if he comes back again, set him in the stocks. Nay, no words, fellow, you are well served. Master Smith, follow me with your party." Again the crowd parted as they walked after Cromwell to a side door that was near at hand, to find themselves alone with him in a small chamber. Here he stopped, and, turning, surveyed them all narrowly, especially Cicely. "I suppose, Master Smith," he said, pointing to Bull, who was wiping his hands clean with the rushes from the floor, "this is the man that you told me played the devil yonder at Blossholme. Well, he can play the fool also. In another minute there would have been a tumult, and you would have lost your chance of seeing his Grace, for months perhaps, since he has determined to ride from London tomorrow morning northwards, though it is true he may change his mind ere then. This rebellion troubles him much, and were it not for the loan you promise, when loans are needed, small hope would you have had of audience. Now come quickly, and be careful that you do not cross the king's temper, for it is touchy to-day. Indeed, had it not been for the queen, who was with him, and minded to see this Lady Harfleet, that they would have burnt as a witch, you must have waited till a more convenient season, which may never come. Stay, what is in that great sack you carry, Bull?" "The devil's livery, may it please your lordship." "The devil's livery, many wear that in London. Still, bring the gear, it may make his Grace laugh, and if so, I'll give you a gold piece, who have had enough of oaths and scoldings. Aye," he added, with a sour grin, "and of blows too. Now follow me into the presence, and speak only when you are spoken to, nor dare to answer if he rates you." They went from the room down a passage and through another door, where 2 guards on duty looked suspiciously at Bull and his sack, but at a word from Cromwell let them through into a large room in which a fire burned upon the hearth. At the end of this room stood a huge, proud-looking man with a flat and cruel face, broad as an ox skull, as Thomas Bull said afterwards, who was dressed in some rich, sombre stuff, and wore a velvet cap upon his head. He held a parchment in his hand, and before him on the other side of an oak table sat an officer of state in a black robe, who wrote upon another parchment, whereof there were many scattered about on the table and the floor. "Knave!" shouted the king, for they guessed that it was he, "you have cast up these figures wrong. Oh, that it should be my lot to be served by none but fools!" "Pardon, your Grace," said the secretary in a trembling voice. "Thrice have I checked them." "Would you gainsay me, you lying lawyer?" bellowed the king again. "I tell you they must be wrong, since otherwise the sum is short by 1100 pounds of that which I was promised. Where are the 1100 pounds? You must have stolen them, thief." "I steal, oh, your Grace, I steal." "Aye, why not, since your betters do, only you are clumsy, you lack skill. Ask my Lord Cromwell there to give you lessons. He learned under the best of masters, and is a merchant by trade to boot. Oh, get you gone, and take your scribblings with you." The poor officer hastened to avail himself of this invitation. Hurriedly collecting his parchments, he bowed himself from the presence of his irate sovereign. At the door, about 12 feet away, however, he turned. "My gracious liege," he began, "the casting of the Count is right. Upon my honor as a Christian soul, I can look your Majesty in the face with truth in my eye." Now on the table there was a massive inkstand, made from the horn of a ram, mounted with silver feet. This Henry seized and hurled with all his strength. The aim was good, for the heavy horn struck the wretched scribe upon the nose, so that the ink squirted all over his face, and felled him to the floor. "Now there is more in your eye than truth," shouted the king. "Be off, ere the stool follows the ink-pot." 2 ladies who stood by the fire talking together, and taking no heed, for to such rude scenes they seemed to be accustomed, looked up and laughed a little, then went on talking, while Cromwell smiled and shrugged his shoulders. Then, in the midst of the silence which followed, Thomas Bull, who who had been watching open-mouthed, ejaculated in his great voice, "A bull's eye! A noble bull! Myself cannot throw straighter." "Silence, fool!" hissed Emlyn. "Who spoke?" asked the king, looking towards them sharply. "Please, my liege, it was I, Thomas Bull." "Thomas Bull! Can you sling a stone, Thomas Bull, whoever you may be?" "Ay, sire, but not better than you, I think. That was a gallant shot." "Thomas Bull, you are right. Seeing the hurry and the unhandiness of the missile, it was excellent. Let the knave stand up again, and I'll bet you a gold noble to a brass nail that you'll not do as well within an inch. Why, the fellow's gone. Will you try on my Lord Cromwell? Nay, this is no time for fooling. What's your business, Thomas Bull, and who are these women with you?" Now Cromwell stepped forward, and with cringing gestures began to explain something to the king in a low voice. Meanwhile, the two ladies became suddenly interested in Cicely, and one of them, a pale but pretty woman, splendidly dressed, stepped forward to her, saying, "Are you the Lady Harfleet, of whom we have heard, she who was to have been burnt as a witch? Yes? And is that your child? Oh, what a beautiful child! A boy, I'll swear. Come to me, sweet, and in after years you can tell that a queen has nursed you." And she stretched out her arms. As good fortune would have it, the child was awake, and attracted by the queen's pleasant voice, or perhaps by the necklace of bright gems that she wore, he held out his little hands towards her, and went quite contentedly to her breast. Jane Seymour, for it was she, began to fondle him with delight, then, followed by her lady, ran to the king, saying, "See, Harry, see what a beautiful boy, and how he loves me! God send us such a son as this." The king glanced at the child, then answered, "Ay, he would do well enow. Well, it rests with you, Jane. Nurse him, perhaps the sex is catching. I and all England would see you brought to bed of that sickness, sweet. What said you, Cromwell?" The great minister went on with his explanations, till the king, wearying of them, called out, "Come here, Master Smith." Jacob advanced, bowing, and stood still. "Now, Master Smith, the Lord Cromwell tells me that if I sign these papers, you, on behalf of the Lady Harfleet, will loan me £1,000 without interest, which, as it chances, I need. Wherefore, then, is this £1,000? For I will have no promises, not even from you, who are known to keep them, Master Smith." Jacob thrust his hand beneath his robe, and from various inner pockets drew out bags of gold, which he set in a row upon the table. "Here they are, your grace," he said quietly. "If you should wish for them, they can be weighed and counted." "God's truth, I think I had better keep them, lest some accident should happen to you on the way home, Master Smith. You might fall into the Thames and sink." "Your grace is right, the parchments will be lighter to carry even," he added meaningly, "with your highness's name added." "I can't sign," said the king doubtfully. "All the ink is spilt." Jacob produced a small inkhorn, which, like most merchants of the day, he carried hung to his girdle, drew out the stopper, and with a bow set it on the table. "In truth, you are a good man of business, Master Smith, too good for a mere king. Such readiness makes me pause. Perhaps we had better meet again at a more leisured season." Jacob bowed once more, and stretching out his hand, slowly lifted the first of the bags of gold, as though to replace it in his pocket. "Cromwell, come hither," said the king, whereon Jacob, as though in forgetfulness, laid the bag back upon the table. "Repeat the heads of this matter, Cromwell." "My liege, the Lady Harfleet seeks justice on the Spaniard Malden, abbot of Blossholme, who is said to have murdered her father, Sir John Fotterell, and her husband, Sir Christopher Harfleet. The rumour has it that the latter escaped his clutches, and is now in Spain. Item, the said abbot has seized the lands which this Dame Cicely should have inherited from her father, and demands their restitution." "By God's wounds, justice she shall have, and for nothing, if we can give it her," answered the king, letting his heavy fist fall upon the table. "No need to waste time in setting out her wrongs. Why, 'tis the same Spanish knave Malden, who stirs up all this hell's broth in the north. Well, he shall boil in his own pot, for against him our score is long. What more?" "A declaration, sire, of the validity of the marriage between Christopher Harfleet and Cicely Fotterell, which without doubt is good and lawful, although the abbot disputes it for his own ends, and an indemnity for the deaths of certain men who fell when the said abbot attacked and burnt the house of the said Christopher Harfleet. It should have been granted the more readily if Malden had fallen also, but let that pass. What more? The promise, your grace, of the lands of the Abbey of Blossholme and of the Priory of Blossholme, in consideration of the loan of £1,000 advanced to your grace by the agent of Cicely Harfleet, Jacob Smith. A large demand, my lord. Have these lands been valued? Aye, sir, by your commissioner, who reports it doubtful if with all their tenements and timber they would fetch £1,000 in gold. Our commissioner? A fig for his valuing. Doubtless he has been bribed. Still, if we repay the money, we can hold the land, and since this Dame Harfleet and her husband have suffered sorely at the hands of Malden and his armed ruffians, why, let it pass also. Now, is that all? I weary of so much talk. But one more thing, your grace, put in Cromwell hastily, for Henry was already rising from his chair. Dame Cicely Harfleet, her servant Emlyn Stower, and a certain crazed old nun were condemned of sorcery by a court ecclesiastic, whereof the abbot Malden was a member, the said abbot alleging that they had bewitched him and his goods. Then he was pleader and judge in one. That is so, your grace. Already, without the royal warrant, they were bound to the stake for burning, the said Malden having usurped the prerogative of the crown, when your commissioner Lay arrived and loosed them, but not without fighting, for certain men were killed and wounded. Now they humbly crave your majesty's royal pardon for their share in this manslaying, if any, as also does Thomas Bull yonder, who seems to have done the slaying. Well can I believe it, muttered the king. And a declaration of the invalidity of their trial and condemning, and of their innocence of the foul charge laid against them. Innocence! Exclaimed Henry, growing impatient, and fixing on the last point. How do we know they were innocent, though it is true that if Dame Harfleet is a witch, she is the prettiest that ever we have heard of or seen. You ask too much, after your fashion, Cromwell. I crave your grace's patience for one short minute. There is a man here who can prove that they were innocent, yonder red-haired Bull. What? He who praised our shooting? Well, Bull, since you are so good a sportsman, we will listen to you. Prove, and be brief. Now all is finished, murmured Emlyn to Cicely, for assuredly fool Thomas will land us in the mire. Your grace, said Bull, in his big voice, I obey in 4 words. I was the devil. The devil you were, Thomas Bull. Now, your meaning. Your grace, Blossholme was haunted. I haunted it. How could you do otherwise if you lived there? I'll show your grace. And without more ado, to the horror of Cicely, Thomas tumbled from his sack all his hellish garb, and set to work to clothe himself. In a minute, for he was practised at the game, the hideous mask was on his head, and with it the horns and skin of the widow's billy-goat. The tail and painted hides were tied about him, and in his hand he waved the eel spear, short-handled now. Thus arrayed, he capered before the astonished king and queen, shaking the tail that had a wire in it, and clattering his hoofs upon the floor. "Oh, good devil, most excellent devil!" exclaimed his majesty, clapping his hands. "If I had met thee, I'd have run like a hare. Stay, Jane, peep you through yonder door, and tell me who are gathered there." The queen obeyed, and, returned, said, "There be a bishop and a priest, I cannot see which, for it grows dark, with chaplains and sundry of the lords of council waiting audience." "Good, then we'll try the devil on these devil-tamers. Friend Satan, go you to that door, slip through it softly, and rush upon them, roaring, driving them through this chamber, so that we may see which of them will be bold enough to try to lay you. Dost understand, Beelzebub?" Thomas nodded his horns, and departed silently as a cat. "Now open the door and stand on one side," said the king. Cromwell obeyed, nor had they long to wait. Presently from the hall beyond there rose a most fearful clamour. Then through the door shot the bishop panting. After him came lords, chaplains, and secretaries, and last of all the priest, who, being very fat, and hampered by his gown, could not run so fast, although at his back Satan leapt and bellowed. No heed did they take of the king's majesty or of aught else, whose only thought was flight, as they tore down the chamber to the further door. "Oh, noble, noble!" hallooed the king, who was shaking with laughter. "Give him your fork, devil, give him your fork!" And having the royal command, Bull obeyed with zeal. In 30 seconds it was all over. The rout had come and gone. Only Thomas in his hideous attire stood bowing before the king, who exclaimed, "I thank thee, Thomas Bull, thou hast made me laugh as I have not laughed for years. Little wonder that thy mistress was condemned for witchcraft. Now," he added, changing his tone, "off with that mummery, and Cromwell, go catch one of those fools, and tell them the truth, ere tales fly round the palace. Jane, cease from merriment, there is a time for all things. Come hither, Lady Harfleet, I would speak with you." Cicely approached, and curtsied, leaving her boy in the queen's arms, where he had gone to sleep, for she did not seem minded to part with him. "You are asking much of us," he said suddenly, searching her with a shrewd glance, "relying, doubtless, on your wrongs, which are deep, or your face, which is sweet, or both. Well, these things move kings mayhap more than others. Also I knew old Sir John, your father, a loyal man and a brave. He fought well at Flodden. And young Harfleet, your husband, if he still lives, had a good name like his forebears. Moreover, your enemy, Malden, is ours, a treacherous foreign snake, such as England hates, for he would set her beneath the heel of Spain. Now, Dame Harfleet, doubtless when you go hence, you will bear away strange stories of King Harry and his doings. You will say he plays the fool, pelting his servants with inkpots when he is wrath, as God knows he has often cause to be, and scaring his bishops with sham Satans, as after all, why should he not, since it is a dull world? You'll say, too, that he takes his teaching from his ministers, and signs what these lay before him with small search as to its truth or falsity. Well, that's the lot of monarchs who have but one man's brain and one man's time, who needs must trust their slaves until these become their masters, and there is naught left," here his face grew fierce, "save to kill them, and find more and worse. New servants, new wives," and he glanced at Jane, who was not listening. "New friends, false, all three of them, new foes, and at last old Death to round it off. Such has been the lot of kings from David down, and such, I think, it shall always be." He paused a while, brooding heavily, then looked up and went on. "I know not why I should speak thus to a chit like you, except it be that, young though you are, you also have known trouble and the feel of a sick heart. Well, I have heard more of you and your affairs than you might think, and I forget nothing, that's my gift. Dame Harfleet, you are richer than you have been advised to say, and I repeat you ask much of me. Justice is your due from your sovereign, and you shall have it. But these wide abbey lands, this priory of Blossholme, whose nuns have befriended you, and whom you desired to save, this embracing pardon for others who have shed blood, this cancelling outside of the form of law of a sentence passed by a court duly constituted, if unjust, all in return for a loan of a pitiful £1,000. You huckster well, Lady Harfleet. One would think that your father had been a chapman, not rough John Fotterel, who can drive so shrewd a bargain with your king's necessities." Sire, broke in Cicely in confusion, "I have no more. My lands are wasted by Abbot Malden. My husband's hall is burnt by his soldiers. My first year's rents, if ever I should receive them, are promised." "To whom?" She hesitated. "To whom?" he thundered. "Answer, madam." "To your royal commissioner, Dr. Lay." "Ah, I thought as much, though when he spoke of you, he did not tell it, the snuffling rogue." "The jewels that came to me from my mother are in pawn for that £1,000, and I have no more." "A palpable lie, Dame Harfleet, for if so, how have you paid Cromwell? He did not bring you here for nothing." "Oh, my liege, said Cicely, sinking to her knees. "Ask not a helpless woman to betray those who have befriended her in her most sore and honest need. I said I have nothing, unless those gems are worth more than I know." "And I believe you, Dame Harfleet. We have plucked you bare between us, have we not? Still, perchance, you will be no loser in the end. Now, Master Smith there does not work for love alone." "Sire," said Jacob, "that is true. I copy my masters. I have this lady's jewels in pledge, and I hope to make a profit on them. Still, sire, there is among them a pink pearl of great beauty that it might please the queen to wear. Here it is." And he laid it upon the table. "Oh, what a lovely thing!" said Jane. "Never have I seen its like." "Then study it well, wife, for you look your last upon it. When we cannot pay our soldiers to keep our crown upon our head and preserve the liberties of England against the Spaniard and the Pope of Rome, it is no time to give you gems that I have not bought. Take that gaud and sell it, Master Smith, for whatever price it will fetch among the Jews, and add the price to the £1,000, lessened by 1/10 for your trouble. Now, Dame Harfleet, you have bought the favour of your king, for whoever else may, I'll not lie. Ah, here comes Cromwell. My lord, you have been long. Your grace, yonder priest is in a fit from fright, and thinks himself in hell. I had to tarry with him till the doctor came. Doubtless he'll get better now that you are gone. Poor man, if a sham devil frights him so, what will he do at last? Now, Cromwell, I have made examination of this business, and I will sign your papers, all of them. Dame Harfleet here tells me how hard you have worked her, all for nothing, Cromwell, and that pleases me, who at times have wondered how you grew so rich, as your learner, Wolsey, did before you. He took bribes, Cromwell. My liege, he answered in a low voice, this case was cruel. It moved my pity, as it has ours, leaving us the richer by £1,000 and the price of a pearl. There, 5. Are they all signed? Take them, Master Smith, as the Lady Harfleet is your client, and study them tonight. If aught be wrong or omitted, you have our royal word that we will set it straight. This is our command. Note it, Cromwell, that all things be done quickly, as occasion shall rise to give effect to these precepts, pardons, and patents, which you, Cromwell, shall countersign ere they leave this room. Also, that no further fee, secret or declared, shall be taken from the Lady Harfleet, whom henceforth, in token of our special favour, we create and name the Lady of Blossholme, from her husband or her child, as to any of these matters, and that Commissioner Lay, on receipt thereof, shall pay into our treasury any sum or sums that Dame Harfleet may have promised to him. Write it down, my Lord Cromwell, and see that our words are carried out, lest it be the worst for you. The Vicar-General hastened to obey, for there was something in the king's eye that frightened him. Meanwhile the queen, after she had seen the coveted pearl disappear into Jacob's pocket, thrust back the child into Cicely's arms, and without any word of adieu or reverence to the king, followed by her lady, departed from the room, slamming the door behind her. Her Grace is cross because that gem, your gem, Lady Harfleet, was refused to her, said Henry, then added in an angry growl, "'Fore God, does she dare to play off her tempers upon me, and so soon, when I am troubled about big matters? Oh ho, Jane Seymour is the queen to-day, and she'd let the world know it. Well, what makes a queen? A king's fancy and a crown of gold, which the hand that set it on can take off again, head and all, if it stick too tight. And then where's your queen? Pest upon women and the whims that make us seek their company. Dame Harfleet, you'd not treat your lord so, would you? You have never been to court, I think, or I should have known your eyes again. Well, perhaps it is well for you, and that's why you are gentle and loving. If I am gentle, sire, it is trouble that has gentled me, who have suffered so much, and know not even now whether after 1 week of marriage I am wife or widow. Widow? Should that be so, come to me, and I will find you another and a nobler spouse. With your face and possessions it will not be difficult. Nay, do not weep. For your sake I trust that this lucky man may live to comfort you and serve his king. At least he'll be no Spaniard's tool and Pope's plotter. Well will he serve your grace, if God gives him the chance, as my murdered father did. We know it, lady. Cromwell, will you never have finished with those writings? The consul waits us, and so does supper, and a word or two with her grace ere bedtime. You, Thomas Bowl, you are no fool, and can hold a sword. Tell me, shall I go up north to fight the rebels, or bide here, and let others do it? Bide here, your grace, answered Thomas, promptly. Twixt Wash and Humber is a wild land in winter, and arrows fly about there like ducks at night, none knowing whence they come. Also your grace is over heavy for a horse on forest roads and moorland, and if aught should chance, why, they'd laugh in Spain and Rome, or nearer, and who would rule England, with a girl child on its throne? And he stared hard at Cromwell's back. Truth at last, and out of the lips of a red-haired bumpkin, muttered the king, also staring at the unconscious Cromwell, who was engaged on his writing, and either feigned deafness or did not hear. Thomas Bowl, I said that you were no fool, although some may have thought you so. Is there aught you would have in payment for your counsel, save money, for of that we have none? Aye, sire, freedom from my oath as a lay-brother of the Abbey of Blossholme, and leave to marry. To marry whom? Her, sire. And he pointed to Emlyn. What? The other handsome witch? See you not that she has a temper? Nay, woman, be silent. It is written in your face. Well, take your freedom and her with it. But, Thomas Bull, why did you not ask otherwise when the chance came your way? I thought better of you. Like the rest of us, you are but a fool after all. Farewell to you, fool Thomas, and to you also, my fair Lady of Blossholme. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 16. The Voice in the Forest. The four were back safe in their lodging in Cheapside, whither, after the deeds had been sealed, 3 soldiers escorted them by command. "Have we done well? Have we done well?" asked Jacob, rubbing his hands. "It would seem so, Master Smith," replied Cicely, "thanks to you. That is, if all the king said is really in those writings." "It is there, sure enough," said Jacob. "For know, that with the aid of a lawyer and 3 scriveners, I drafted them myself in the Lord Cromwell's office this morning, and oh, I drew them wide. Hard we worked with no time for dinner, and that was why I was 10 minutes late by the clock, for which Emlyn here chided me so sharply. Still, I'll read them through again, and if aught is left out, we will have it righted, though these are the same parchments, for I set a secret mark upon them." Nay, said Cicely, "leave well alone. His Grace's mood may change, or the Queen, that matter of the pearl." "Ah, the pearl! It grieved me to part with that beautiful pearl. But there was no way out. It must be sold, and the money handed over. Our honor is on it. Had I refused, who knows? Yes, we may thank God, for if the most of your jewels are gone, the wide abbey lands have come, and other things. Nothing is forgot. Bull is unfrocked and may wed. Cousin Stower has got a husband." Then Emlyn, who until now had been strangely silent, burst out in wrath. "Am I, then, a beast, that I should be given to this man like a Harriet at yonder king's bidding?" she exclaimed, pointing with her finger at Bull, who stood in the corner. "Who gave you the right, Thomas, to demand me in marriage?" "Well, since you ask me, Emlyn, it was you yourself, once many years ago, down in the mead by the water, and more lately in the chapel of Blossholme Priory, before I began to play the devil." "Play the devil! Aye, you have played the devil with me. There in the king's presence I must stand for an hour or more, while all talked, and never let a word slip between my lips, and at last hear myself called by his Grace a woman of temper, and you a fool for wishing to marry me. Oh, if ever we do marry, I'll prove his words." "Then, perhaps, Emlyn, we who have got on a long while apart had best stay so," answered Thomas calmly. "Yet, why you should fret because you must keep your tongue in its case for an hour, or because I asked leave to marry you in all honor, I do not know. I have worked my best for you and your mistress at some hazard, and things have not gone so ill, seeing that now we are quit of blame, and in a fair way to peace and comfort. If you are not content, why then the king was right, and I'm a fool, and so good-bye. I'll trouble you no more in fair weather or in foul. I have leave to marry, and there are other women in the world, should I need one." "Tread on their tails, and even worms will turn," soliloquized Jacob, while Emlyn burst into tears. Cicely ran to console her, and Bull made as though he would leave the room. Just then there came a great knocking on the street door, and the sound of a voice crying, "In the king's name! In the king's name! Open!" "That's Commissioner Lay," said Thomas. "I learned the cry from him, and it is a good one at a pinch, as some of you may remember." Emlyn dried her tears with her sleeve. Cicely sat down, and Jacob shovelled the parchments into his big pockets. Then in burst the commissioner, to whom someone had opened. "What's this I hear?" he cried, addressing Cicely, his face as red as a turkey-cock's. "That you have been working behind my back, that you have told falsehoods of me to his Grace, who called me knave and thief, that I am commanded to pay my fees into the treasury. Oh, ungrateful wench, would to God that I had let you burn ere you disgraced me thus." "If you bring so much heat into my poor house, learned doctor, surely all of us will soon burn," said Jacob suavely. "The Lady Harfleet said nothing that his Highness did not force her to say, as I know who was present, and among so many pickings cannot you spare a single dole? Come, drink a cup of wine and be calm." But Dr. Lay, who had already drunk several cups of wine, would not be calm. He reviled first one of them and then the other, but especially Emlyn, whom he conceived to be the cause of all his woes, till at length he called her by a very ill name. Then came forward Thomas Bull, who all this while had been standing in the corner, and took him by the neck. "In the king's name," he said, "nay, complain not, 'tis your own cry, and I have warrant for it." And he knocked Leigh's head against the doorpost. "In the king's name, get out of this!" And he gave him such a kick as never royal commissioner had felt before, shooting him down the passage. "For the third time, in the king's name!" And he hurled him out in a heap into the courtyard. "Be gone, and know if I ever see your pudding face again, in the king's name I'll break your neck." Thus did Visitor Leigh depart out of the life of Cicely, though in due course she paid him her first year's rent, nor ever asked who took the benefit. "Thomas," said Emlyn, when he returned smiling at the memory of that farewell kick, "the king was right. I am quick-tempered at times. No ill thing, for it has helped me more than once. Forget, and so will I." And she gave him her hand, which he kissed, then went to see about the supper. While they ate, which they did heartily, who needed food, there came another knock. "Go, Thomas," said Jacob, "and say we see none tonight." So Thomas went, and they heard talk. Then he re-entered, followed by a cloaked man, saying, "Here is a visitor whom I dare not deny." Whereon they all rose, thinking in their folly that it was the king himself, and not one almost as mighty in England for a while, the Lord Cromwell. "Pardon me," said Cromwell, bowing in his courteous manner, "and if you will, let me be seated with you, and give me a bite and a sup, for I need them, who have been hard worked to-day." So he sat down among them, and ate and drank, talking pleasantly of many things, and telling them that the king had changed his mind at the council, as he thought, because of the words of Thomas Bull, which he believed had stuck there, and would not go north to fight the rebels after all, but would send the Duke of Norfolk and other lords. Then when he had done, he pushed away his cup and platter, looked at his hosts, and said, "Now to business. My Lady Harfleet, fortune has been your friend this day, for all you asked has been granted to you, which, as his Grace's temper has been of late, is a wondrous thing. Moreover, I thank you that you did not answer a certain question as to myself, which I learn he put to you urgently." "My lord," said Cicely, "you have befriended me. Still, had he pressed me further, God knows. Commissioner Leigh did not thank me tonight." And she told him of the visit they had just received, and of its ending. "A rough man and a greedy, who doubtless henceforth will be your enemy," replied Cromwell. "Still, you were not to blame, for who can reason with a bull in his own yard? Well, while I have power, I'll not forget your faithfulness, though in truth, my Lady of Blossholme, I sit upon a slippery height, and beneath waits a gulf that has swallowed some as great and greater. Therefore I will not deny it. I lay by while I may, not knowing who will gather." He brooded a while, then went on with a sigh. "The times are uncertain. Thus, you who have the promise of wealth may yet die a beggar. The lands of Blossholme Abbey, on which you hold a bond that will never be redeemed, are not yet in the king's hands to give. A black storm is bursting in the north, and, I say this in secret, the fury of it may sweep Henry from the throne. If it should be so, away with you to any land where you are not known, for then after this day's work here a rope will be your only heritage. More, this queen, unlike Anne who is gone, is a friend to the party of the church, and though she affects to care little for such things, is bitter about that pearl, and therefore against you, its owner. Have you no jewel left that you could spare which I might take to her? As for the pearl itself, which Master Smith here swore to me was not to be found in the whole world when he showed me its fellow, it must be sold as the king commanded." And he looked at Jacob somewhat sourly. Now Cicely spoke with Jacob, who went away and returned presently with a brooch, in which was set a large white diamond, surrounded by 5 small rubies. "Take her this of my duty, my lord," said Cicely. I will. Oh, fear not, it shall reach her for my own sake as well as yours. You are a wise giver, Lady Harfleet, who knows when and where to cast your bread upon the waters. And now I have a gift for you that perchance will please you more than gems. Your husband, Christopher Harfleet, accompanied by a servant, has landed in the north, safe and well." "Oh, my lord!" she cried. "Then where is he now?" Alas, the rest of the tale is not so pleasing, for as he journeyed, from Hull I think, he was taken prisoner by the rebels, who have him fast at Lincoln, wishing to make him, whose name is of account, one of their company. But he being a wise and loyal man, contrived to send a letter to the king's captain in those parts, which has reached me this night. Here it is. Do you know the writing?" "Aye, aye," gasped Cicely, staring at the scrawl that was ill-writ and worse spelt, for Christopher was no scholar. "Then I'll read it to you, and afterwards certify a copy to multiply the evidence. To the captain of the King's forces outside Lincoln. This to give notice to you, his Grace, and his ministers, and all others, that we, Christopher Harfleet, knight, and Geoffrey Stokes, his servant, when journeying from the seaport whither we had come from Spain, were taken by rebels in arms against the king, and brought here to Lincoln. These men would win me to their party, because the name of Harfleet is still strong and known. So violent were they that we have taken some kind of oath. Yet this writing advises you that so I only did to save my life, having no heart that way, who am a loyal man, and understand little of their quarrel. Life, in sooth, is of small value to me, who have lost wife, lands, and all. Yet ere I die, I would be avenged upon the murderous abbot of Blossholme, and therefore I seek to keep my breath in me and to escape. I learn that the said abbot is afoot, with a great following, within 50 miles of here. Pray God he does not get his claws in me again, but if so, say to the king that Harfleet died faithful. Christopher Harfleet. Geoffrey Stokes. His mark. "My lord," said Cicely, "what shall I do, my lord?" "There is naught to be done, save trust in God and hope for the best. Doubtless he will escape, and at least his Grace shall see this letter tomorrow morning, and send orders to help him if may be. Copy it, Master Smith." Jacob took the letter, and began to write swiftly, while Cromwell thought. "Listen," he said presently. "Round Blossholme there are no rebels. All of that colour have drawn off north. Now Fotterel and Harfleet are good names yonder. Cannot you journey thither, and raise a company?" "Aye, aye, that I can do," broke in Bull. "In a week I will have 100 men at my back. Give commission and money to my lady there, and name me captain, and you'll see." "The commission and the captaincy, under the privy signet, shall be at this house by 9 of the clock to-morrow," answered Cromwell. "The money you must find, for there is none outside the coffers of Jacob Smith. Yet pause, Lady Harfleet. There is risk, and here you are safe." "I know the risk," she answered. "But what do I care for risks, who have taken so many, when my husband is yonder, and I may serve him?" "An excellent spirit. Let us trust that it comes from on high," remarked Cromwell. But old Jacob, as he wrote vera copia for his lordship's signature at the foot of the transcript of Christopher's letter, shook his head sadly. In another minute Cromwell had signed without troubling to compare the two, and with some gentle words of farewell was gone, having bigger matters waiting his attention. Cicely never saw him again. Indeed, with the exception of Jacob Smith, she never saw any of those folk again, including the king, who had been concerned in this crisis of her life. Yet, notwithstanding his cunning and his extortion, she grieved for Cromwell when some 4 years later the Duke of Suffolk and the Earl of Southampton rudely tore the garter and his other decorations off his person, and he was haled from the council to the Tower, and thence after abject supplications for mercy, to perish a criminal upon the block. At least he had served her well, for he kept all his promises to the letter. One of his last acts also was to send her back the pink pearl which he had received as a bribe from Jacob Smith, with a message to the effect that he was sure it would become her more than it had him, and that he hoped it would bring her a better fortune. When Cromwell had gone, Jacob turned to Cicely, and inquired if she were leaving his house upon the morrow. "Have I not said so?" she asked, with impatience. "Knowing what I know, how could I stay in London? Why do you ask?" "Because I must balance our account. I think you owe me a matter of 20 marks for rent and board. Also it is probable that we shall need money for our journey, and this day has left me somewhat bare of coin." "Our journey?" said Cicely. "Do you, then, accompany us, Master Smith?" "With your leave, I think so, lady. Times are bad here. I have no shilling left to lend. Yet if I do not lend, I shall never be forgiven. Also I need a holiday, and ere I die would once again see Blossholme, where I was born, should we live to reach it. But if we start tomorrow, I have much to do this night. For instance, your jewels which I hold in pawn must be set in a place of safety, also these deeds, whereof copies should be made, and that pearl must be left in trusty hands for sale. So at what hour do we ride on this mad errand?" "At 11 of the clock," answered Cicely, "if the king's safe conduct and commission have come by then." "So be it. Then I bid you good night. Come with me, worthy Bull, for there'll be no sleep for us. I go to call my clerks, and you must to the stable. Lady Harfleet and you, cousin Emlyn, get you to bed." On the following morning Cicely rose with the dawn, nor was she sorry to do so, who had spent but a troubled night. For long sleep would not come to her, and when it did at length, she was tossed upon a sea of dreams, dreams of the king, who threatened her with his great voice, of Cromwell, who took everything she had down to her cloak, of Commissioner Lay, who dragged her back to the stake because he had lost his bribe. But most of all she dreamed of Christopher, her beloved husband, who was so near and yet as far away as he had ever been, a prisoner in the hands of the rebels, her husband who deemed her dead. From all these fantasies she awoke weeping and oppressed by fears. Could it be that when at length the cup of joy was so near her lips, fate waited to dash it down again? She knew not, who had naught but faith to lean on, that faith which in the past had served her well. Meanwhile, she was sure that if Christopher lived, he would make his way to Cranwell or to Blossholme, and, whatever the risk, thither she would go also as fast as horses could carry her. Hurry as they would, midday was an hour gone ere they rode out of Cheapside. There was so much to do, and even then things were left undone. The four of them travelled humbly clad, giving out that they were a party of merchant folk returning to Cambridge after a visit to London as to an inheritance in which they were interested, especially Cicely, who posed as a widow named Johnson. This was their story, which they varied from time to time according to circumstances. In some ways their minds were more at ease than when they travelled to the great city, for now at least they were clear of the horrid company of Commissioner Lay and his people, nor were they haunted by the knowledge that they had about them jewels of great price. All these jewels were left behind in safe keeping, as were also the writings under the king's hand and seal, of which they only took attested copies, and with them the commission that Cromwell had duly sent to Cicely, addressed to her husband and herself, and Bull's certificate of captaincy. These they hid in their boots, or the linings of their vests, together with such money as was necessary for the costs of travel. Thus riding hard, for their horses were good and fresh, they came unmolested to Cambridge on the night of the second day, and slept there. Beyond Cambridge, they were told, the country was so disturbed that it would not be safe for them to journey. But just when they were in despair, for even Bull said that they must not go on, a troop of the king's horse arrived on their way to join the Duke of Norfolk, wherever he might lie in Lincolnshire. To their captain, one Jeffreys, Jacob showed the king's commission, revealing who they were. Seeing that it commanded all his grace's officers and servants to do them service, this Captain Jeffreys said that he would give them escort until their roads separated. So next day they went on again. The company was not pleasant, for the men, of whom there were about 100, proved rough fellows. Still, having been warned that he who insulted or laid a finger on them should be hanged, they did them no harm. It was well, indeed, that they had their protection, for they found the country through which they passed up in arms, and were more than once threatened by mobs of peasants, led by priests, who would have attacked them had they dared. For 2 days they travelled thus with Captain Jeffreys, coming on the evening of the 2nd to Peterborough, where they found lodgings at an inn. When they rose the next morning, however, it was to discover that Jeffreys and his men had already gone, leaving a message to say that he had received urgent orders to push on to Lincoln. Now once more they told their old tale, declaring that they were citizens of Boston, and having learned that the fens were peaceful, perhaps because so few people lived in them, started forward by themselves under the guidance of Bull, who had often journeyed through that country, buying or selling cattle for the monks. An ill land was it to travel in also in that wet autumn, seeing that in many places the floods were out and the tracks were like a quagmire. The first night they spent in a marshman's hut, listening to the pouring rain and fearing fever and ague, especially for the boy. The next, by good fortune, they reached higher land and slept at a tavern. Here they were visited by rude men, who, being of the party of rebellion, sought to know their business. For a while things were dangerous, but Bull, who could talk their own dialect, showed that they were scarcely to be feared, who travelled with 2 women and a babe, adding that he was a lay brother of Blossholme Abbey, disguised as a serving man for dread of the king's party. Jacob Smith also called for ale, and drank with them to the success of the Pilgrimage of Grace, as their revolt was named. In this way they disarmed suspicion with one tale and another. Moreover, they heard that as yet the country round Blossholme remained undisturbed, although it was said that the abbot had fortified the abbey and stored it with provisions. He himself was with the leaders of the revolt in the neighborhood of Lincoln, but he had done this that he might have a strong place to fall back on. So in the end the men went away full of strong beer, and that danger passed by. Next morning they started forward early, hoping to reach Blossholme by sunset, though the days were shortening much. This, however, was not to be, for as it chanced, they were badly bogged in a quagmire that lay about 2 miles off their inn, and when at length they scrambled out, had to ride many miles round to escape the swamp. So it happened that it was already well on in the afternoon when they came to that stretch of forest in which the abbot had murdered Sir John Fotherell. Following the woodland road, towards sunset they passed the mere where he had fallen. Weary as she was, Cicely looked at the spot and found it familiar. "I know this place," she said. "Where have I seen it? Oh, in the ill dream I had on the day I lost my father." "That is not wonderful," answered Emmeline, who rode beside her carrying the child, "seeing that Thomas says it was just here they butchered him. Look, yonder lie the bones of Meg, his mare. I know them by her black mane." "Ay, lady," broke in Bull, "and there he lies also where he fell. They buried him with never a Christian prayer." And he pointed to a little careless mound between 2 willows. "Jesu have mercy on his soul," said Cicely, crossing herself. "Now, if I live, I swear that I will move his bones to the chancel of Blossholme Church, and build a fair monument to his memory." This, as all visitors to the place know, she did, for that monument remains to this day, representing the old knight lying in the snow, with the arrow in his throat, between the 2 murderers whom he slew, while round the corner of the tomb Geoffrey Stokes gallops away. While Cicely stared back at this desolate grave, muttering a prayer for the departed, Thomas Bull heard something which caused him to prick his ears. "What is it?" asked Jacob Smith, who saw the change in his face. "Horses galloping. Many horses, master," he answered. "Yes, and riders on them. Listen." They did so, and now they also heard the thud of horses' hoofs and the shouts of men. "Quick, quick," said Bull. "Follow me. I know where we may hide." And he led them off to a dense thicket of thorn and beech scrub which grew about 200 yards away under a group of oaks at a place where 4 tracks crossed. Owing to the beech leaves, which, when the trees are young, as every gardener knows, cling to the twigs through autumn and winter, this place was very close, and hid them completely. Scarcely had they taken up their stand there, when, in the red light of the sunset, they saw a strange sight. Along, not that road they had followed, but another, which led round the farther side of Kingsgrave Mount, now seen and now hidden by the forest trees, a tall man in armour mounted on a grey horse, accompanied by another man in a leathern jerkin mounted on a black horse, galloped towards them, whilst, at a distance of not more than 100 yards behind them, appeared a motley mob of pursuers. "Escaped prisoners being run down," muttered Bull, but Cicely took no heed. There was something about the appearance of the rider of the grey horse that seemed to draw her heart out of her. She leaned forward on her beast's neck, staring with all her eyes. Now the 2 were almost opposite the thicket, and the man in mail turned his face to his companion, and called cheerily, "We gain! We'll slip them yet, Geoffrey!" Cicely saw the face. "Christopher!" she cried. "Christopher!" Another moment, and they had swept past, but Christopher, for it was he, had caught the sound of that remembered voice. With eyes made quick by love and fear, she saw him pulling on his rein. She heard him shout to Geoffrey, and Geoffrey shout back to him in tones of remonstrance. They halted confusedly in the open space beyond. He tried to turn, then perceived his pursuers drawing nearer, and, when they were already at his heels, with an exclamation, pulled round again to gallop away. Too late! Up the slope they sped for another 100 yards or so. Now they were surrounded, and now, at the crest of it, they fought, for swords flashed in the red light. The pursuers closed in on them like hounds on an outrun fox. They went down. They vanished. Cicely strove to gallop after them, for she was crazed, but the others held her back. At length there was silence, and Thomas Bull, dismounting, crept out to look. 10 minutes later he returned. "All have gone," he said. "Oh, he is dead!" wailed Cicely. "This fatal place has robbed me of father and of husband." "I think not," answered Bull. "I see no bloodstains, nor any signs of a man being carried. He went living on his horse. Still, would to heaven that women could learn when to keep silent." End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 17. Between Doom and Honor. The day was about to break when at last, utterly worn out in body and mind, Cicely and her party rode their stumbling horses up to the gates of Blossholme Priory. "Pray God the nuns are still here," said Emmeline, who held the child, "for if they have been driven out and my mistress must go farther, I think that she will die. Knock hard, Thomas. That old gardener is deaf as a wall." Bull obeyed with a good will, till presently the grille in the door was opened, and a trembling woman's voice asked who was there. "That's Mother Matilda," said Emmeline, and slipping from her horse, she ran to the bars and began to talk to her through them. Then other nuns came, and between them they opened one of the large gates, for the gardener either could not or would not be aroused, and passed through it into the courtyard, where, when it was understood that Cicely had really come again, there was a great welcoming. But now she could scarcely speak, so they made her swallow a bowl of milk, and took her to her old room, where sleep of some kind overcame her. When she awoke, it was 9 of the clock. Emmeline, looking little the worse, was already up, and stood talking with Mother Matilda. "Oh!" cried Cicely, as memory came back to her. "Has aught been heard of my husband?" They shook their heads, and the prioress said, "First you must eat, sweet, and then we will tell you all we know, which is little." So she ate, who needed food sadly, and while Emmeline helped her to dress herself, hearkened to the news. It was of no great account, only confirming that which they had learnt from the fenmen, that the abbey was fortified and guarded by strange soldiers, rebellious men from the north, or foreigners, and the abbot supposed to be away. Bull, who had been out, reported also that a man he met declared that he had heard a troop of horsemen pass through the village in the night, but of this no proof was forthcoming, since if they had done so, the heavy rain that was still falling had washed out all traces of them. Moreover, in those times people were always moving to and fro in the dark, and none could know if this troop had anything to do with the band they had seen in the forest, which might have gone some other way. When Cicely was ready, they went downstairs, and in Mother Matilda's private room found Jacob Smith and Thomas Bull awaiting them. "Lady Harfleet," said Jacob, with the air of a man who has no time to lose, "things stand thus. As yet none know that you are here, for we have the gardener and his wife under ward. But as soon as they learn it at the abbey, there will be risk of an attack, and this place is not defensible. Now at your hall of Shefton it is otherwise, for there it seems is a deep moat with the drawbridge and the rest. To Shefton then, therefore, you must go at once, unobserved if may be. Indeed, Thomas has been there already, and spoken to certain of your tenants, whom he can trust, who are now hard at work preparing and victualling the place, and passing on the word to others. By nightfall he hopes to have 30 strong men to defend it, and within 3 days 100, when your commission and his captaincy are made known. Come then, for there is no time to tarry, and the horses are saddled." So Cicely kissed Mother Matilda, who blessed and thanked her for all she had done, or tried to do, on behalf of the sisterhood, and within 5 minutes once more they were on the backs of their weary beasts, and riding through the rain to Shefton, which happily was but 3 miles away. Keeping under the lee of the woods, they left the priory unobserved, for in that wet few were stirring, and the sentinels at the abbey, if there were any, had taken shelter in the guard-house. So thankfully enough they came unmolested to walled and wooded Shefton, which Cicely had last seen when she fled thence to Cranwell on the day of her marriage, years and years ago, or so it seemed to her tormented heart. It was a strange and a sad homecoming, she thought, as they rode over the drawbridge and through the sodden and weed-smothered pleasance to the familiar door. Yet it might have been worse, for the tenants whom Bull had warned had not been idle. For 2 hours past and more, a dozen willing women had swept and cleaned. The fires had been lit, and there was plenteous food of a sort in the kitchen and the storeroom. Moreover, in the big hall were gathered about a score of her people, who welcomed her by raising their bonnets and even tried to cheer. To these at once Jacob read the king's commission, showing them the signet and the seal, and that other commission which named Thomas Bull a captain with wide powers, the sight and hearing of which writings seemed to put a great heart into them, who so long had lacked a leader and the support of authority. One and all they swore to stand by the king and their lady, Cicely Harfleet, and her lord, Sir Christopher, or if he were dead, his child. Then about half of them took horse and rode off, this way and that, to gather men in the king's name, while the rest stayed to guard the hall and work at its defences. By sunset, men were riding up from all sides, some of them driving carts loaded with provisions, arms, and fodder, or sheep and beasts that could be killed for sustenance, while as they came, Jacob enrolled their names upon a paper, and by virtue of his commission Thomas Bull swore them in. Indeed, that night they had 40 men quartered there, and the promise of many more. By now, however, the secret was out, for the story had gone round, and the smoke from the Shefton chimneys told its own tale. First a single spy appeared on the opposite rise, watching. Then he galloped away, to return an hour later with 10 armed and mounted men, one of whom carried a banner on which were embroidered the emblems of the Pilgrimage of Grace. These men rode to within 100 paces of Shefton Hall, apparently with the object of attacking it. Then, seeing that the drawbridge was up and that archers with bent bows stood on either side, halted, and sent forward one of their number with a white flag to parley. "Who holds Shefton?" shouted this man, "and for what cause?" "The Lady Harfleet, its owner, and Captain Thomas Bull, for the cause of the king," called old Jacob Smith back to him. "By what warrant?" asked the man. "The abbot of Blossholme is lord of Shefton, and Thomas Bull is but a lay brother of his monastery." "By warrant of the king's grace," said Jacob, and then and there, at the top of his voice, he read to them the royal commission, which when the envoy had heard, he went back to consult with his companions. For a while they hesitated, apparently still meditating attack, but in the end rode away and were seen no more. Bull wished to follow and fall on them with such men as he had, but the cautious Jacob Smith forbade it, fearing lest he should tumble into some ambush and be killed or captured with his people, leaving the place defenseless. So the afternoon went by, and ere evening closed in they had so much strength that there was no more cause for fear of an attack from the abbey, whose garrison, they learned, amounted to not over 50 men and a few monks, for most of these had fled. That night Cicely with Emlyn and old Jacob were seated in the long upper room, where her father, Sir John Fotterel, had once surprised Christopher paying his court to her, when Bull entered, followed by a man with a hang-dog look, who was wrapped in a sheepskin coat, which seemed to become him very ill. "Who is this, friend?" asked Jacob. "An old companion of mine, your worship, a monk of Blossholme, who was weary of grace and its pilgrimages, and seeks the king's comfort and pardon, which I have made bold to promise to him." "Good," said Jacob. "I'll enter his name, and if he remains faithful, your promise shall be kept. But why do you bring him here?" "Because he bears tidings." Now something in Bull's voice caused Cicely, who was brooding apart, to look up sharply and say, "Speak, and be swift." "My lady," began the man in a slow voice, "I, who am named Basil in religion, have fled the abbey because, although a monk, I am true to the king, and moreover have suffered much from the abbot, who has just returned raging, having met with some reverse out Lincoln way, I know not what. My news is that your lord, Sir Christopher Harfleet, and his servant Geoffrey Stokes are prisoners in the abbey dungeons, whither they were brought last night by a company of the rebels, who had captured them, and afterwards rode on. "Prisoners!" exclaimed Cicely. "Then he is not dead or wounded? At least he is whole and safe?" "Ay, my lady, whole and safe as a mouse in the paws of a cat before it is eaten." The blood left Cicely's cheeks. In her mind's eye she saw Abbot Maldon turned to a great cat with a monk's head, and patting Christopher with his claws. "My fault, my fault!" she said in a heavy voice. "Oh, if I had not called him he would have escaped. Would that I had been stricken dumb!" "I don't think so," answered Brother Basil. "There were others watching for him ahead who, when he was taken, went away, and that is how you came to get through so neatly. At least there he lies, and if you would save him, you had best gather what strength you can and strike at once." "Does he know that I live?" asked Cicely. "How can I tell, lady? The abbey dungeons are no good place for news. Yet the monk who took him his food this morning said that Sir Christopher told him that he had been undone by some ghost, which called to him with the voice of his dead wife, as he rode near Kingsgrave Mount." Now when Cicely heard this, she rose, and left the room, accompanied by Emlyn, for she could bear no more. But Jacob Smith and Bull remained questioning the man closely upon many matters, and, having learned all he could tell them, sent him away under guard, and sat there till nigh midnight, consulting and making up their plans with the farmers and yeomen whom they called to them from time to time. Next morning early they sought out Cicely, and told her that to them it seemed wise that the abbey should be attacked without delay. "But my husband lies there," she answered in distress, "and then they will kill him." "So I fear they may if we do not attack," replied Jacob. "Moreover, lady, to tell the truth, there are other things to be thought of. For instance, the king's cause and honor, which we are bound to forward, and the lives and goods of all those who through us have declared themselves for him. If we lie idle, Abbot Maldon will send messengers to the north, and within a few days bring down thousands upon us, against whom we cannot hope to stand. Indeed, it is probable that he is already sent. But if they hear that the abbey has fallen, the rebels will scarcely come for revenge alone. Lastly, if we sit with folded hands, our own people may grow cold with doubts and fears and melt away, who now are hot as fire." "If it must be, so let it be. In God's hands I leave his life," said Cicely in a heavy voice. That day the king's men, under the captaincy of Bull, advanced and invested the abbey, setting their camp in Blossholme village. Cicely, who would not be left behind, came with them, and once more took up her quarters in the priory, which on a formal summons opened its gates to her, its only guard, the deaf gardener, surrendering at discretion. He was set to work as a camp servant, and never in his life did he labor so hard before, since Emlyn, who owed him many a grudge, saw to it that he did not lack for tasks that were mean and heavy. Now that day Thomas and others spied out the abbey, and returned shaking their heads, for without cannon, and as yet they had none, the great building of hewn stone seemed almost impregnable. At but one spot indeed was attack possible, from the back where once stood the dormers and farmsteadings which Emlyn had egged on Thomas to burn. These had been built up to the inner edge of the moat, making, as it were, part of the abbey wall, but the fierce fire had so cracked and crumbled their masonry that several rods of it had fallen forward into the water. For purposes of defense, the gap thus formed was now closed by a double palisade of stout stakes, filled in with faggots, the charred beams of the old buildings, and other rubbish. Yet to carry this palisade, protected as it was by the broad and deep moat, and commanded from the windows and the corner tower, was more than they dared try, since if it could be done at all, it would certainly cost them very many lives. One thing they had learned, however, from the monk Basil and others, that in the abbey there was but small store of food to feed so many. 3 days' supply, said Basil, and none put it at over 4. That evening, then, they held another council, at which it was determined to starve the place out, and only attempt an onslaught if their spies reported to them that the rebels were marching to its relief. "But," urged Cicely, "then my lord and Geoffrey Stokes will starve also." Whereon they went away sadly, saying there was no choice, seeing that they were but 2 men, and the lives of many lay at stake. The siege began. just such a siege as Cicely had suffered at Cranwell Towers. The first day the garrison of the abbey scoffed at them from the walls. The second day they scoffed no longer, noting that the force of the besiegers increased, which it did hourly. The third day, suddenly they let down the drawbridge and poured out onto it as though for a sortie, but when they perceived the scores of Bull's men waiting bow in hand and arrow on string, changed their minds and drew the bridge up again. "They grow hungry and desperate," said the shrewd Jacob. "Soon we shall have some message from them." He was right, since just before sunset a postern gate was opened and a man, holding a white flag above his head, was seen swimming across the moat. He scrambled out on the farther side, shook himself like a dog, and advanced slowly to where Bull and the women stood upon the abbey green, out of arrow-shot from the walls. Indeed, Cicely, who was weak with dread and wretchedness, leaned against the oaken stake that had never been removed, to which once she was tied to be burned for witchcraft. "Who is that man?" said Emmeline to her. Cicely scanned the gaunt, bearded figure, who walked haltingly like one that is sick. "I know not, yet, yes, he puts me in mind of Geoffrey Stokes." "Geoffrey it is, and no other," said Emmeline, nodding her head. "Now what news does he bear, I wonder?" Cicely made no reply, only clung to her stake and waited, with just such a heart as once she had waited there while the abbey cook blew up his brands to fire her faggots. Geoffrey was opposite to her now. His sunken eyes fell upon her, and at the sight his bearded chin dropped, making his face look even more long and hollow than it had before. "Ah," he said, speaking to himself, "many wars and journeyings, months in an infidel galley, 3 days with not enough food to feed a rat, and a bath in November water. Well, such things, to say nothing of a worse, turn men's brains. Yet to think that I should live to see a daylight ghost in homely Blossholme, who never met with one before." Still staring, he shook the water from his beard, then added, "Lay brother or Captain Thomas Bull, whichever you may be nowadays, if you're not a ghost also, give me a quart of strong ale and a loaf of bread, for I'm empty as a gutted herring, and floating heavenwards, so to speak, who would stick upon this scurvy earth." "Geoffrey, Geoffrey!" broke in Cicely. "What news of your master? Emmeline, tell him that we still live. He does not understand." "Oh, you still live, do you?" he said slowly. "So the fire could not burn you after all, or Emmeline either. Well then, there's hope for everyone, and perhaps hunger and Abbot Malden's knives cannot kill Christopher Harfleet." "He lives, then, and is well?" "He lives, and is as well as a man may be after a 3 days' fast in a black dungeon that is somewhat damp. Here's a writing on the matter for the captain of this company." And, taking a letter from the folds of the white flag in which it had been fastened, he handed it to Bull, who, as he could not read, passed it on to Jacob Smith. Just then a lad brought the ale for which Geoffrey had asked, and with it a platter of cold meat and bread, on which he fell like a famished hound, drinking in great gulps and devouring the food almost without chewing it. "By the saints, you are starved, Geoffrey," said a yeoman who stood by. "Come with me and shift those wet clothes of yours, or you will take harm." And he led him off, still eating, to a tent that stood near by. Meanwhile Jacob, having studied the letter with bent and anxious brows, read it aloud. It ran thus: "To the captain of the king's men, from Clement, abbot of Blossholme. By what warrant I know not, you besiege us here, threatening this abbey and its religious with fire and sword. I am told that Cicely Fotterel is your leader. Say, then, to that escaped witch that I hold the man she calls her husband, and who is the father of her base-born child, a prisoner, unless this night she disperses her troop and sends me a writing signed and witnessed, promising indemnity on behalf of the king to me and those with me for all that we may have done against him and his laws, or privately against her, and freedom to go where we will without pursuit or hindrance or loss of land or chattels. Know that tomorrow at the dawn we put to death Christopher Harfleet, knight, in punishment of the murders and other crimes that he has committed against us, and in proof thereof his body shall be hung from the abbey tower. If otherwise, we will leave him unharmed here, where you shall find him after we have gone. For the rest, ask his servant Geoffrey Stokes, whom we send to you with this letter. Clement, Abbot." Jacob finished reading, and a silence fell upon all who listened. let us go to some private place, and consider this matter, said Emlyn. Nay, broke in Cicely, it is I, who in my lord's absence hold the king's commission, and I will be heard. Thomas Bull, first send a man under flag to the abbot, saying that if aught of harm befalls Sir Christopher Harfleet, I'll put every living soul within the abbey walls to death by sword or rope, and stand answerable for it to the king. Set it in writing, Master Smith, and send with it copy of the king's commission for my warrant. At once. Let it be done at once. So they went to a cottage near by, which Bull used as a guardhouse, where this stern message was written down, copied out fair, signed by Cicely and by Bull as captain, with Jacob Smith for witness. This paper, together with a copy of the king's commissions, Cicely with her own hand gave to a bold and trusty man, charged to ask an answer, who departed, carrying the white flag, and wearing a steel shirt beneath his doublet, for fear of treachery. When he had gone, they sent for Geoffrey, who arrived clad in dry garments, and still eating, for his hunger was that of a wolf. "Tell us all," said Cicely. "It will be a long story if I begin at the beginning, lady. When your worshipful father, Sir John, and I rode away from Shefton on the day of his murder—" "Nay, nay," interrupted Cicely, "that may stand. We have no time. My lord and you escaped from Lincoln, did you not? And, as we saw, were taken in the forest?" "Ay, lady. Some tricksy spirit called out with your voice, and he heard and pulled rein, and so they came on to us and overwhelmed us, though without hurt as it chanced. Then they brought us to the abbey, and thrust us into that accursed dungeon, where, save for a little bread and water, we have starved for 3 days in the dark. That is all the tale." "How, then, did you come out, Geoffrey?" "Thus, my lady. Something over an hour ago a monk and 3 guards unlocked the dungeon door. While we blinked at his lantern, like owls in the sunlight, the monk said that the abbot purposed to send me to the camp of the king's party to offer Christopher Harfleet's life against the lives of all of them. He told him, Harfleet, also, that he had brought ink and paper, and that if he wished to save himself, he would do well to write a letter praying that this offer might be accepted, since otherwise he would certainly die at dawn." "And what said my husband?" asked Cicely, leaning forward. "What said he? Why, he laughed in their faces, and told them that first he would cut off his hand. On this they haled me out of the dungeon roughly enough, for I would have stayed there with him to the end. But as the door closed, he shouted after me, 'Tell the king's officers to burn this rat's nest, and take no heed of Christopher Harfleet, who desires to die.'" "Why does he desire to die?" asked Cicely again. "Because he thinks his wife dead, mistress, as I did, and believes that in the forest he heard her voice calling him to join her." "Oh God, oh God!" moaned Cicely. "I shall be his death." "Not so," answered Geoffrey. "Do you know so little of Christopher Harfleet that you think he would sell the king's cause to gain his own life? Why, if you yourself came and pleaded with him, he would thrust you away, saying, 'Get thee behind me, Satan.'" "I believe it, and I am proud," muttered Cicely. "If need be, let Harfleet die. We'll keep his honor and our own, lest he should live to curse us. Go on." "Well, they led me to the abbot, who gave me that letter which you have, and bade me take it, and tell the case to whoever commanded here. Then he lifted up his hand, and laying it on the crucifix about his neck, swore that this was no idle threat, but that unless his terms were taken, Harfleet should hang from the tower top at tomorrow's dawn, adding, though I knew not what he meant, 'I think you'll find one yonder who will listen to that reasoning.' Now he was dismissing me, when a soldier said, 'Is it wise to free the Stokes? You forget, my lord abbot, that he is alleged to have witnessed a certain slaying yonder in the forest, and will bear evidence.' 'Ay,' answered Malden, 'I had forgotten who in this press remembered only that no other man would be believed. Still, perhaps it would be best to choose a different messenger, and to silence this fellow at once. Write down that Geoffrey Stokes, a prisoner, strove to escape, and was killed by the guards in self-defence. Take him hence, and let me hear no more.' Now my blood went cold, although I strove to look as careless as a man may on an empty stomach after 3 days in the dark, and cursed him prettily in Spanish to his face. Then, as they were hailing me off, Brother Martin, do you remember him? He was our companion in some troubles overseas, stepped forward out of the shadow and said, 'Of what use is it, abbot, to stain your soul with so foul a murder? Since John Fotterell died, the king has many things to lay to your account, and any one of them will hang you. Should you fall into his hands, he'll not hark back to Fotterell's death, if, indeed, you were to blame in that matter.' 'You speak roughly, brother,' answered the abbot, 'and acts of war are not murder. though perchance afterwards you might say they were, to save your own skin, or others might. Well, if so, there's wisdom in your words. Touch not the man. Give him the letter, and thrust him into the moat to swim it. His lies can make no odds in the count against us. Well, they did so, and I came here, as you saw, to find you living, and now I understand why Malton thought that Harfleet's life is worth so much. And, having done his tale, once more Geoffrey began to eat. Cicely looked at him. They all looked at him. This gaunt, fierce man, who, after many other sorrows and strivings, had spent 3 days in a black dungeon with the rats, fed upon water and a few fingers of black bread. Yes, with the crawling rats and another man so dear to one of them, who still sat in that horrid hole, waiting to be hung like a felon at the dawn. The silence, with only Geoffrey's munching to break it, grew painful, so that all were glad when the door opened and the messenger whom they had sent to the abbey appeared. He was breathless, having run fast, and somewhat disturbed, perhaps because 2 arrows were sticking in his back, or rather in his jerkin, for the mail beneath had stopped them. "Speak," said old Jacob Smith. "What is your answer?" "Look behind me, master, and you will find it," replied the man. "They set a ladder across the moat, and a board on that, over which a priest tripped to take my writing. I waited a while, till presently I heard a voice hail me from the gateway tower, and, looking up, saw Abbot Malton standing there, with a face like that of a black devil. 'Hark you, knave,' he cried to me, 'get you gone to the witch, Cicely Fotterel, and to the recreant monk, Bowl, whom I curse and excommunicate from the fellowship of Holy Church, and tell them to watch for the first light of dawn, for by it, somewhat high up, they'll see Christopher Harfleet hanging black against the morning sky.' On hearing this I lost my caution, and hallooed back, 'If so, ere tomorrow's nightfall you shall keep him company, every one of you, black against the evening sky, except those who go to be quartered at Tower Hill and Tyburn.' Then I ran, and they shot at me, hitting once or twice. But, though old, the mail was good, and here am I, unhurt except for bruises." A while later, Cicely, Jacob Smith, Thomas Bowl, Geoffrey Stokes, and Emlyn Stower sat together taking counsel. Very earnest counsel, for the case was desperate. Plan after plan was brought forward and set aside for this reason or for that, till at length they stared at each other emptily. "Emlyn," exclaimed Cicely at last, "in past days you were wont to be full of comfortable words. Have you never a one in this extreme?" For all the while Emlyn had sat silent. "Thomas," said Emlyn, looking up, "do you remember when we were children where we used to catch the big carp in the abbey moat?" "Aye, woman," he answered, "but what time is this for fishing stories of many years ago? As I was saying, of that tunnel underground there is no hope. Beyond the grove it is utterly caved in and blocked. I've tried it. If we had a week, perhaps—" "Let her be," broke in Jacob. "She has something to tell us." "And do you remember," went on Emlyn, "that you told me that there the carp were so big and fat, because just at this place, neath the drawbridge, the abbey sewer, the big abbey sewer down which all foul things are poured, empties itself into the moat, and that therefore I would eat none of those fish, even in Lent?" "Aye, I remember. What of it?" "Thomas, did I hear you say that the powder you sent for had come?" "Yes, an hour ago. 6 kegs, by the carrier's van, of 100 weight each. Not so much as we hoped for, but something, though as the cannon is not come, for the king's folk had none, it is of no use." "A dark night, a ladder with a plank on it, a brick arched drain, 200 weight, or, better still, 4 of powder set beneath the gate, a slow match, and a brave man to fire it, taken together with God's blessing, these things might do much," mused Emlyn, as though to herself. Now at length they took her point. "They be listening like a cat for a mouse," said Bowl. "I think the wind rises," she answered. "I hear it in the trees. I think presently it will blow a gale. Also, lanterns might be shown at the back, where the breach is, and men might shout there, as though preparing to attack. That would draw them off. Meanwhile, Geoffrey Stokes and I would try our luck with the ladder and the kegs of powder. He to roll, and I to fire when the time came, for being, as you have heard, a witch, I understand how to humour brimstone." 10 minutes later, and their plans were fixed. 2 hours later, and, in the midst of a raving gale, hidden by the pitchy darkness and the towering screen of the lifted drawbridge, Emlyn and the strong Geoffrey rolled the kegs of powder over planks laid across the moat, into the mouth of the big drain, and 20 feet down it, till they lay under the gateway towers. Then, lying there in the stinking filth, they drew the spigots out of the holes that they had made in them, and in their places set the slow matches. Geoffrey struck a flint, blew the tinder to a glow, and handed it to Emlyn. "Now get you gone," she said. "I follow. At this job, one is better than two." A minute later, she joined him on the farther bank of the moat. "Run," she said. "Run for your life. There's death behind." He obeyed, but Emlyn turned and screamed, till, hearing her through the gale, all the guard hurried up the towers, flashing lanterns, to see what passed. "Storm! Storm!" she cried. "Up with the ladders, for the king and Harfleet! Storm! Storm!" Then she too turned and fled. End of Chapter 17. Chapter 18 of The Lady of Blossholme. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luella Margaret. The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 18. Out of the Shadows. Through the black night, sudden and red, there shot a sheet of fire, illumining all things as lightning does. Above the roaring of the gale, there echoed a dull and heavy noise, like to that of muffled thunder. Then, after a moment's pause and silence, the sky rained stones, and with them the limbs of men. "The gateway's gone!" shouted a great voice. It was that of Bull. "Out with the ladders!" Men who were waiting ran up with them, and thrust them, four in all, athwart the moat. By the planks that were lashed along their stays, they scrambled across, and over the piles of shattered masonry, into the courtyard beyond, where none waited them, for all who watched here were dead or maimed. "Light the lanterns!" shouted Bull again, "for it will be dark in yonder," and a man who followed with a torch obeyed him. Then they rushed across the courtyard to the door of the refectory, which stood open. Here in the wide, high-roofed hall they met the mass of Malden's people pouring back from the faggoted breach, where they had been gathered, expecting attack, some of them also bearing lanterns. For a moment the two parties stood staring at each other. Then followed a wild and savage scene. With shouts and oaths and battle cries they fought furiously. The massive oaken tables were overthrown. By the red flicker of the pole-borne lanterns men grappled and fell, and slew each other upon the floor. A priest struck down a yeoman with the brazen crucifix, and next moment himself was brained with its broken shaft. "For God and grace!" shouted some. "For the king and Harfleet!" answered others. Keep line! Roared Bull, "and sweep them out!" The lanterns were dashed down and extinguished till but one remained, a red and wavering star. Hoarse voices shouted for light, for none knew friend from foe. It came. Someone had fired the tapestries, and the blaze ran up them to the roof. Then, fearing lest they should be roasted, the abbot's folk gave way, and fled to the farther door, followed by their foes. Here it was that most of them fell, for they jammed in the doorway and were cut down there, or on the stair beyond. While Bull still plied his axe fiercely, someone caught his arm and screamed into his ear, Let be! The wretch is sped!" In his red wrath he turned to strike the speaker, and saw by the flare that it was Cicely. "What do you here?" he cried. "Get gone!" "Fool!" she answered in a low, fierce voice. "I seek my husband. Show me the path ere it be too late. You know it alone. Come, Geoffrey Stokes, a lantern, a lantern!" Geoffrey appeared, sword in one hand and lantern in the other, and with him Emlyn, who also held a sword which she had plucked from a fallen man. Emlyn, still foul with the filth of the sewer and the mud of the moat. "I may not leave," muttered Thomas Bull. "I seek Malden." "On to the dungeons!" shrieked Emlyn, "or I will stab you. I heard them give word to kill Harfleet." Then he snatched the light from Geoffrey's hand, and crying, "Follow me!" rushed along a passage till they came to an open door, and beyond it to stairs. They descended the stairs and passed other passages which ran underground, till a sudden turn to the right brought them to a little walled-in place with a vaulted roof. 2 torches flared in iron holders in the masonry, and by the light of them they saw a strange and fearful sight. At the end of the open place, a heavy, nail-studded door stood wide, revealing a cell, or rather, a little cave beyond. Those who are curious can see it to this day. Fastened by a chain to the wall of this dungeon was a man, who held in his hand a three-legged stool and tugged at his chain like a maddened beast. In front of him, holding the doorway, stood a tall, lank priest, his robe tucked up into his girdle. He was wounded, for blood poured from his shaven crown as he plied a great sword with both hands, striking savagely at 4 men who tried to cut him down. As Bull and his party appeared, one of these men fell beneath the priest's blows, and another took his place, shouting, "Out of the way, traitor! We would kill Harfleet, not you!" "We die or live together, murderer!" answered the priest, in a thick, gasping voice. At this moment one of them, it was he who had spoken, heard the sound of the rescuer's footsteps and glanced back. In an instant he turned and was running past them like a hare. As he went, the light from the lantern fell upon his face, and Emmeline knew it for that of the abbot. She struck at him with the sword she held, but the steel glanced from his mail. He also struck, but at the lantern, dashing it to the ground. "Seize him!" screamed Emmeline. "Seize Malden, Geoffrey!" And at the words Stokes bounded away, only to return presently, having lost him in the dark passages. Then with a roar Bull leaped upon the 2 remaining men-at-arms as they faced about, and very soon, between his axe and the sword of the priest behind, they sank to the ground and died, still fighting, who knew they had no hope of quarter. It was over and done, and dreadful silence fell upon the place, the silence of the dead, broken only by the heavy breathing of those who remained alive. There the wounded monk leaned against the doorpost, his red sword drooping to the floor. There Harfleet, the stool still lifted, rested his weight against the chain, and peered forward in amazement, swaying as though from weakness. And lastly, there lay the 3 slain men, one of whom still moved a little. Cicely crept forward. Over the dead she went, and past the priest, till she stood face to face with the prisoner. "Come nearer, and I will dash out your brains," he said in a hoarse voice, for such light as there was came from behind her, whom he thought to be but another of the murderers. Then at length she found her voice. "Christopher!" she cried. "Christopher!" He hearkened, and the stool fell from his hand. "The voice again," he muttered. "Well, 'tis time. Tarry a while, wife. I come, I come." And he fell back against the wall, shutting his eyes. She leapt to him, and throwing her arms about him, kissed his lips, his poor bloodless lips. The shut eyes opened. "Death might be worse," he said, "but so I knew that we would meet." Now Emmeline, seeing some change in his face, snatched one of the torches from its iron, and ran forward, holding it so that the light fell full on Cicely. "Oh, Christopher!" she cried, "I am no ghost, but your living wife!" He heard, he stared again, then lifted his thin hand and stroked her hair. "Oh God!" he exclaimed, "the dead live!" And down he fell in a heap at her feet. They thrust Cicely aside, Cicely who stood there shivering, she who thought he had gone again, and this time forever. With difficulty they broke the chain whereby he had been held like a kennelled hound, and bore him, still senseless, up the long passages, Bull going ahead as guard, and Geoffrey Stokes following after. Behind them came Emmeline, supporting the wounded monk Martin, for it was he and no other who had saved the life of Christopher. As they went up towards the stairs, they heard a roaring noise. "Fire!" said Cicely, who knew that sound well, and next instant the light of it burst upon them, and its smoke wrapped them round. The abbey was ablaze, and its wide hall in front looked like the mouth of hell. "Did I not prophesy that it would be so, yonder at Cranwell burning?" asked Emmeline, with a fierce laugh. "Follow me!" shouted Bull. "Be swift now, ere the roof falls and traps us." On they went desperately, leaving the hall on their left, and well for them was it that Thomas knew the way. One little chamber through which they passed had already caught, for flakes of fire fell among them from above, and here the smoke was very thick. They were through it, who even a minute later could never have walked that path and lived. They were through it, and out into the open air by the cloister door, which those who fled before them had left wide. They reached the moat just where the breach had been mended with faggots, and mounting on them, Bull shouted till one of his own men heard him and dropped the bow that he had raised to shoot him as a rebel. Then planks and ladders were brought, and at last they escaped from danger and the intolerable heat. Thus it was that Cicely, who lost her love in fire, found him once more. For Christopher was not dead, as at first they feared. They carried him to the priory, and there Emlyn, having felt his heart, and found that it still beat, though faintly, sent Mother Matilda to fetch some of that Portugal wine of hers, which Commissioner Lay had praised. Spoonful by spoonful she poured it down his throat, till at length he opened his eyes, though only to shut them again in natural sleep, for the wine had taken a hold of his starved body and weakened brain. For hour after hour Cicely sat by him, only rising from time to time to watch the burning of the great abbey church, as once she had watched that of its dormers in farmsteading. About 3 in the morning the lead ceased to pour down in a silvery molten shower, its roofs fell in, and by dawn it was nothing but a fire-blackened shell, much as it remains today. Just before daybreak Emlyn came to her, saying, "There is one who would speak with you." "I cannot see him," she answered. "I abide by my husband." "Yet you should," said Emlyn, "since but for him you would now have no husband. The monk Martin, who held off the murderers, is dying, and desires to bid you farewell." Then Cicely went to find the man still conscious, but fading away with the flow of his own blood, which could not be stayed by any skill they had. "I have come to thank you," she murmured, who knew not what else to say. "Thank me not," he answered faintly, pausing often between his words, "who did but strive to repay part of a great debt. Last winter I shared an awful sin, in obedience not to my heart but to my vows. I who was set to watch the body of your husband found that he lived, and by my help he was borne away upon a ship. That ship was taken by the infidels, and afterwards he and I and Geoffrey served together upon their galleys. There I fell sick, and your husband nursed me back to life. It was I who brought you the deeds, and wrote the letter which I gave to Emlyn Stower. My vows still held me fast, and I did no more. This night I broke their bonds, for when I heard the order given that he should be slain, I ran down before the murderers, and fought my best, forgetting that I was a priest, till at length you came. Let this atone my crimes against my country, my king, and you, that I died for my friend at last, as I am glad to do, who finds this world too difficult." "I will tell him if he lives," sobbed Cicely. He opened his eyes, which had shut, and answered, "Oh, he'll live, he'll live. You have had many troubles, but, save for the creep of age and death, they are over. I can see and know." Again he shut his eyes, and the watchers thought that all was done, till of a sudden once more he opened them, and added in broken tones, "The abbot, show him mercy, if you can. He is wicked and cruel, but I have been his confessor, and know his heart. He strove for a good end, by an evil road. Queen Catherine was the king's lawful wife. To seize the monasteries is shameless theft. Also, his blood is not English, he sees otherwise, and serves the Pope as I do, and Spain as I do not. As I have helped you, help him. Judge not, that ye be not judged. Promise." And he raised himself a little on the bed, and looked at her earnestly. "I promise," answered Cicely, and as she spoke, Martin smiled. Then his face turned quite grey, all the light went out of his eyes, and a moment later Emlyn threw a linen cloth over his head. It was finished. Cicely returned to Christopher to find him sitting up in bed, drinking a bowl of broth. "Oh, my husband, she said, casting her arms about him. Then she took her son and laid him upon his father's breast. 3 days had gone by, and Christopher and Cicely were walking in the shrubbery of Shefton Hall. By now, although still weak, he was almost recovered, whose only sicknesses had been grief and famine, for which joy and plenty are wonderful medicines. It was evening, a pleasant and beautiful early winter evening, just fading into night. Seated on a bench, he had been telling her his adventures, and they were a moving tale, worthy, as Cicely wrote afterwards in a letter to old Jacob Smith, that is still extant in her fine, quaint handwriting, to be recorded in a book, though this, it would seem, was never done. He told her of the great fight on the ship Great Yarmouth, when they were taken by the 2 Turkish pirates, and of how bravely Father Martin bore himself. Afterwards, when they came to the galleys, by good fortune Martin, Geoffrey, and he served on the same bench. Then Martin fell sick of some southern fever, and being in port at Tunis at the time, where they could get fruit, they nursed him back to life and strength. 4 months later, the Emperor Charles attacked Tunis, and when it fell, through God's mercy, they were rescued with the other Christian slaves, after which Martin returned to England, taking old Sir John's writings to be delivered to his next heir, for they all believed Cicely to be dead. But Christopher and Geoffrey, having nothing to seek at home, stayed to fight with the Spaniards against the Turks, who had oppressed them so sorely. When that war was over, they made their way back to England, not knowing where else to go, and having a score to settle against the Spanish abbot of Blossholme, and, well, she knew the rest. "Aye," answered Cicely, she knew it, and never would forget it. But it was chill for him, sitting on that bench. He must come in. Christopher laughed at her, and answered, "Sweetheart, if you could have seen the bench on which it was my lot to sit yonder off the coast of Africa, but new recovered from the wound which I had of Malden's men at Cranwell Towers, you would not be anxious for me here. There for 6 long months, chained to Geoffrey and to Father Martin, for it pleased those heathen devils to keep the 3 of us together, perhaps that they might watch us better. Through the hot days that scorched us, and the chill, wet nights, we labored at our oars, while infidel overseers ran up and down the boards, and thrashed us with their whips of hide. Yes," he added slowly, "they thrashed us, as though we were oxen in a yoke. You have seen the scars upon my back." "Oh, God, to think of it!" she murmured. "You, a noble Englishman, beaten by those savage wretches like a brute. How did you bear it, Christopher?" "I know not, wife. I think that had it not been for that angel in man's form, the priest Martin, peace be to his noble soul, that angel who thrice at least has saved my life, I should have dashed out my brains against the thwarts, or starved myself to death, or provoked the Moors to kill me. I, who, thinking you dead, had no hope to live for. But Martin taught me otherwise. He preached patience and submission, saying that I did not suffer for nothing. Of his own miseries he never spoke, and that he was sure that, fearful as was my lot, all things worked together for good to me." "And therefore it was that you lived on, husband? Oh, I'll build a shrine to that Saint Martin." "Not altogether, dear. I'll tell you true. I lived for vengeance. Vengeance on Clement Malden, the man or the devil, who wrought me all this ill, and, being yet young, made me old with grief and pain." And he pointed to his scarred forehead, and the hair above, that was now grizzled with white. "And vengeance, too, upon those worshippers of Mohammed, my masters. Yes, though Martin reproved me when I made confession to him, I think it was for that I lived. And the saints know," he added grimly. "Afterwards, at the sack, and elsewhere, I took it on the Turks. Oh, you should have seen the last meeting of Geoffrey and myself with the captain of that galley and his officers who had so often beaten us. No, I am glad you did not see it, for it was fierce and bloody. Even the hard-hearted Spaniards stared." He paused, and perhaps the changed the current of his mind, for during all his afterlife, when Christopher brooded on these things, he grew gloomy for hours, and even days. Cicely said hurriedly, "I wonder what has chanced to our enemy, the abbot. The search has been close, the roads are watched, and we knew that he had none with him, for all his foreign soldiers are slain or taken. I think he must be dead in the fire, Christopher." He shook his head. "A devil does not die in fire. He is away somewhere, to plot fresh murders, perhaps our own and our boys. Oh," he added savagely, "till my hands are about his throat and my dagger is in his heart, there's no peace for me, who have a score to pay, and you both to guard." Cicely knew not what to answer. Indeed, when this mood was on him, it was hard to reason with Christopher, who had suffered so fearfully, and, like herself, been saved but by a miracle or the mandate of heaven. Of a sudden a hush fell upon the place. The blackbirds ceased their winter chatter in the laurels. It grew so still that they heard a dead leaf drop to the ground. The night was at hand. One last red ray from the set sun struck across the frosty sky, and was reflected to the earth. In the light of that ray, Christopher's trained eyes caught the gleam of something white that moved in the shadow of the beech tree where they sat. Like a tiger he sprang at it, and the next moment hailed out a man. "Look," he said, twisting the head of his captive so that the glow fell on it. "Look, I have the snake. Ah, wife, you saw nothing, but I saw him, and here he is at last, at last." "The abbot!" gasped Cicely. The abbot it was indeed, but oh, how changed! His plump, olive-colored countenance had shrunk to that of a skeleton, still covered by yellow skin, in which the dark eyes rolled bloodshot and unnaturally large. His tonsure and jaws showed a growth of stubbly gray hair. His frame had become weak and small. His soft and delicate hands resembled those of a woman dead of some wasting disease, and, like his garments, were clogged with dirt. The mail shirt he wore hung loose upon him. One of his shoes was gone, and the toes peeped through his stockinged foot. He was but a living misery. "Deliver your arms," growled Christopher, shaking him as a terrier shakes a rat, "or you die. Do you yield? Answer." "How can he?" broke in Cicely, "when you have him by the throat?" Christopher loosed his grip of the man's windpipe, and instead seized his wrists, whereon the abbot drew a great breath, for he was almost choked, and fell to his knees in weakness, not in supplication. "I came to you for mercy," he said presently, "but, having overheard your talk, know that I can hope for none. Indeed, why should I, who showed none, and whose great cause seems dead, that cause for which I fought and lived? Let me die with it. I ask no more. Still, you are a gentleman, and therefore I beg a favor of you. Do not hand me over to be drawn, hanged, and quartered by your brute king. Kill me now. You can say that I attacked you, and that you did it in self-defense. I have no arms, but you may set a dagger in my hand." Christopher looked down at the poor creature, huddled at his feet, and laughed. "Who would believe me?" he asked. "Though, indeed, who would question, seeing that your life is forfeit to me, or any who can take it? Yet that is a matter of which the king's justices shall judge." Malden shivered. "Drawn, hanged, and quartered," he repeated beneath his breath. "Drawn, hanged, and quartered as a traitor to one I never served." "Why not?" asked Christopher. "You have played a cruel game, and lost." He made no answer. Indeed, it was Cicely who spoke, saying, "How came you in such a case? We thought you fled." "Lady," he answered, "I have starved for 3 days and nights in a hole of the ground, like an earthed-up fox. A culvert in your garden hid me. At last I crept out to see the light and die, and heard you talking, and thought that I would ask for mercy, since mortal extremity has no honor." "Mercy?" said Cicely. "Of your treasons I say nothing, for you are not English, and serve your own king, who years ago sent you here to plot against England. But look on this man, my husband. Did he not starve for 3 days and nights in your strong dungeon, ere you came thither to massacre him? Did you not strive to burn him in his hall, and ship him wounded across the seas to doom? Did you not send your assassin to kill my babe, who stood between you and the wealth you needed for your plots, and bind me, the mother, to the stake, a food for fire? Did you not shoot down my father in the wood, fearing lest he should prove you traitor, and after rob me of my heritage? Did you not compel your monks to work evil, and bring some of them to their deaths? Oh, have done! Worm dressed up as God's priest, how can you ride there and ask for mercy?" "I said I came to seek for mercy, because the agony of sleepless hunger drove me, who now seek only death. Insult not the fallen Cicely Fodderel, but take the vengeance that is your due, and kill," replied the abbot, looking up at her with his hollow eyes, adding, with a laugh that sounded like a groan, "Come, Sir Christopher, you have got a sword, and it is time you went to supper. The air is cold. Your wife, if such she be, said it but now." "Cicely," said Christopher, "go to the hall, and summon Geoffrey Stokes. Emlyn will know where to find him." Emlyn, groaned the abbot, give me not over to Emlyn, she'd torture me. Nay, said Christopher, this is not Blossholme Abbey, though what may chance in London I know not. Go now, wife. But Cicely did not stir. She only stared at the wretched creature at her feet. I bid you go, repeated Christopher. And I'll not obey, she answered. Do you remember what I promised Martin ere he died? Martin dead? Is Martin, who saved your husband, dead? Exclaimed the abbot, lifting his face and letting it fall again. Happy Martin to be dead. I was not there, and I am not bound by your promises, Cicely. But I am, and you and I are one. I vowed mercy to this man if he should fall into our power, and mercy he shall have. Then you spare him to destroy us. The wheels go round quick in England, wife. So be it. What I vowed, with God be the rest. He has watched us well heretofore, and I think, she added, with one of her bursts of triumphant faith, will do so to the end. Abbot Maldon, sinful, fallen Abbot Maldon, you are as you were made, and Martin the saint said that there is good in your heart, though you have shown none of it to me or mine. Now, look you, yonder is a wooden summer-house, thatched and warm. Get you there, and I'll send you food, and wine and new clothing by one who will not talk, also a pass to Lincoln. By tomorrow's dawn you will be refreshed, and then you will find a good horse tied to yonder tree, and so away to sanctuary at Lincoln. And if aught of ill befalls you afterwards, know it is not our doing, but that of some other enemy, or of God, with whom I pray you make your peace. May he forgive you, as I do, who knows all hearts, which I do not. Now farewell. Nay, say nothing. There is nothing to be said. Come, Christopher, for this once you obey me, not I you. So they went, and the wretched man raised himself upon his hands and looked after them. But what passed in his heart at that moment, none will ever learn. Some months had gone by, and Blossholme, with all the country round, was once more at peace. The tide of trouble had rolled away northward, whence came rumours of renewed rebellion. Abbot Maldon had been seen no more, and for a while it was believed that although he never took sanctuary at Lincoln, he had done a wiser thing and fled to Spain. Then Emlyn, who heard everything, got news that this was not so, but that he was foremost among those who stirred up sedition and war along the Scottish border. I can well believe it, said Cicely. The sow must to its wallowing in the mire. Nature made him a plotter, and he will follow his heart to the end. Ere long he may find it hard to follow his head, answered Emlyn grimly. Oh, to think that you had that wolf caged, and turned him loose again to prey on England and on us. I did but show mercy to the fallen, nurse. Mercy? I call it madness. Why, when Geoffrey and Thomas heard of it, I thought they would burst with rage, especially Geoffrey, who loved your father well, and loved not the infidel galleys, answered the fierce Emlyn. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord, murmured Cicely, in a gentle voice. The Lord also said that whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Why, I've heard this Maldon quote it to your husband at Cranwell Towers. So will it be, Emlyn, if so it is to be, only let others shed that cruel blood. I would not have it on my hands, or on those of any of my house, for after all, he is an ordained priest of my own faith. Moreover, I had promised. Still, talk not of the matter, lest it should bring trouble on us all, who had no right to loose him. Also, these are ill thoughts for your wedding day. Go, deck yourself in those fine clothes which Jacob Smith has sent from London, since the clergyman will be at Blossholme Church by 4, and I think that Thomas has waited long enough for you. Emlyn smiled a little, and shrugged her broad shoulders, muttering something that would have angered Thomas if he could have heard it, as Cicely went off to join Christopher, who called to her from another room. She found him adding up figures on paper, a very different Christopher to the broken man they had rescued from the dungeon, though still much aged by the terrors of the past year, and just now looking rueful. See, sweet, he said, we should give a marriage portion to Emlyn, who has earned it if ever woman did, but where it is to come from I know not. Those abbey lands Jacob Smith bought from the king are not yours yet, nor Henry's either, though doubtless he will have them soon. Neither have any rents been paid to you from your own estates, and when they come they are promised up in London, while the abbot's razor has shaved my own poor patrimony, bare as a churchyard skull. Also, Mother Matilda and her nuns must be kept till we can endow them with their lands again. One day we, or our boy yonder, may be rich, but till it comes, there are hard times for all of us." "Not so hard as some we have known, husband," she answered, laughing, "for at least we are free and have food to eat, and for the rest we will borrow it from Jacob Smith on the jewels that remain over. Indeed, I have written to him, and he will not refuse." "Aye, but how about Thomas and Emlyn?" "They must do as their betters do. Though there is little stock on it, Thomas has the manor farm, at a low rent, which he may pay when he can, while Jacob put a present in the pocket of Emlyn's wedding dress. What's more, I think he will make her his heir, and if so, she will be rich indeed, so rich that I shall have to curtsy to her. Now go make ready for this marriage, and as you have no fine doublet, bid Geoffrey put on your mail, for you look best in that, or so at least I think, who to my mind look best in anything you chance to wear." Then while he demurred, saying that there was now no need to bear arms in Blossholme, also that Geoffrey was away settling himself as landlord of the Ford Inn, the same that the abbot had once promised to Flounder Meggs, she kissed him, and seizing her boy, who lay crowing in the sunlight, danced with him from the room. For oh, Cicely's heart was merry. There were many folk at the marriage of Emlyn Stower and Thomas Bull, for of late Blossholme had been but a sorry place, and this wedding came to it like the breath of spring to the woods and meads around, a hint of happiness after the miseries of winter. The story of the pair had got about also, how they had been pledged in youth and separated by scheming men for their own purposes, how Emlyn had been married off against her will to an aged partner whom she hated, and Thomas, who was set down as a fool, forced to serve the monastery as a lay brother, a strong hind skilled in the management of cattle and such matters, but half crazy, as indeed it had suited him to feign himself to be. People knew the end of the thing also, that Emlyn had cursed the abbot, and that her curse had been fulfilled, that Thomas Bull had shaken off his superstitious fears and risen up against him, and at last been given the commission of the king, and, as his grace's officer, shown himself no fool, but a man of mettle, who had taken the abbey by storm, and rescued Sir Christopher Harfleet from its dungeons. Emlyn also, like her mistress, had been bound to the stake as a witch, and saved from burning by this same Thomas, who with her had been concerned in many remarkable events, whereof the countryside was full of tales, true or false. Now at last, after all these adventures, they came together to be wed, and who was there for 10 miles round that would not see it done? The monks being gone, Father Roger Necton, the old vicar of Cranwell, he who had united Christopher and his wife Cicely in strange circumstances, and for that deed been obliged to fly for his life when the last abbot of Blossholme burned Cranwell Towers, came to tie the knot before this great congregation. Notwithstanding that they were both of middle age, Emlyn in her grand gown, and the brawny, red-haired Thomas in his yeoman's garb of green, such as he had worn when he wooed her many years before he had put on the monk's russet robe, made a fine and handsome pair at the altar. Or so folk thought, though some friends of the monks, remembering Bull's devil's livery and Emlyn's repute as a sorceress, cried out from the shadow that Satan was marrying a witch, and for his pains got his head broken by Geoffrey Stokes. So the white-haired and gentle Father Necton, having first read the king's order releasing Thomas from his vows, tied them fast according to the ancient rites, and blessed them both. At length it was finished, and the pair walked from the old church to the manor farm, where they were to dwell, followed, as was the custom, by a company of their friends and well-wishers. As they went, they passed through a little stretch of woodland by the stream, where on this spring day the wild daffodils and lilies of the valley were abloom, making sweet the air. Here Emlyn paused a moment, and said to her husband, Captain Bull, "Do you remember this place?" "Aye, wife," he answered. "It was here that we plighted our troth in youth, and looked up to see Malden passing us just beyond that same oak, and felt the shadow of him strike cold to our hearts. You spoke of it yonder in the priory chapel when I came up by the secret way, and its memory made me mad." "Yes, Thomas, I spoke of it," answered Emlyn, in a rich and gentle voice, a new voice to him. "Well, Now let its memory make you happy, as, notwithstanding all my faults, I will if I can." And swiftly she bent towards him, and kissed him, adding, "Come on, husband, they press behind us, and I hope that we have done with perils and plottings." "Amen," answered Bull, and as he spoke, certain strange men who wore the king's colors, and carried a long ladder, went by them at a distance. Wondering what was their business at Blossholme, the pair passed through the last of the woodland, and reached the rise whence they could see the gaunt skeleton of the burnt-out abbey that appeared within 50 paces of them. At this they paused to look, and presently were joined there by Christopher and Cicely, Mother Matilda and her good nuns, Geoffrey Stokes, and others. The place seemed grim and desolate in the evening light, and all of them stood staring at it, filled with their separate thoughts. "What is that?" said Cicely, with a start, pointing to a round, black object new set over the ruin of the gateway tower. Just then a red ray from the sunset struck upon the thing. It was the severed head of Clement Malden, the Spaniard. The End. End of Chapter 18. End of The Lady of Blossholme by H. Rider Haggard.